I'm muted. Okay. I was
We're
like,
both
you didn't
muted.
respond to my how you doing? Um welcome to the Imperial 80s, everybody. How you doing? Hopefully better than us this morning.
I'm doing all right, man. How you doing, bro?
I'm all right. I just want to say to folks, check the show description. You might need to refresh. If you are in the New York tri-state
Oh,
area, Mtume's film, The Hand That Feeds, is
mhm.
premiering
It's
at
New York
the lower
premiere. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right, New York premiere at the Lower East Side, Film Festival this coming Saturday at 3:30. So, if
Hmm.
you're around and able to make it, I think, are still tickets available, and I put the link in the show description. So, I'm gonna try to make it up, so hopefully
Yee, that'd be
we'll see you
dope.
there.
Yeah, folks are in the New York area. New York, come out. Be at Village East Cinemas, which it's interesting. That's like a cinema that like has relevance to the film we're about to do today. It's one of these like old classic like East Village like cinemas that a lot of people have a high regard for. I've never screened there, which is actually kind of cool. But the movie we're about to do today actually is part of that kind of like cultural milieu of, of that era of the 80s, which we actually really haven't covered. Actually, I think this is like a part of the 80s we haven't really kind of like dug into. So it's kind of good to kind of step into that. Yeah. But anyway, if people are out, please come check it out. Not sure when to screen it next. That's a conversation for another time. But yeah. If you can come out, love to see you.
Yeah, the closest we've done, I think, to anything like this so far on the Imperial 80s is probably Prince of Darkness with the
Right.
one we did with Dylan Rodriguez,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
is obviously, I mean, Carpenter was a bigger figure at that point in time than Cronenberg was
Yeah,
with this
and
film. But
Carpenter and Cronenberg are also like, well, they're not buddies anymore. Actually, if you see, there's an interview with Carpenter where he really shits on Cronenberg, which is really funny, but that's a whole other conversation. Well, actually, no, it'll come up. It'll probably come up. Actually,
yeah, that'll have to come up.
yeah.
You can't tease that and then not talk about it.
No,
All right.
no.
So, so our guest today, many folks may know, he's been on Millennials a few different times over the years. J. Moufawad-Paul, and if I mispronounce your part of your last name there, correct me when you come up, Josh. But he's a co-editor of Material, which many folks may know. It's a journal that's distributed through Foreign Languages Press. He is a professor and an author. His books include The Communist Necessity, Continuity and Rupture, Philosophy in the Maoist Terrain, Austerity Apparatus, Methods Devour Themselves, Demarcation and Demystification, Critique of Maoist Reason, Politics in Command, A Taxonomy of Economism. And actually, there's another one even to add on to this about subjectivity, but or what is a revolutionary subject that maybe JMP can say something about in a bit. And he's the co-author of On Necrocapitalism, a plague journal. So a lot of really interesting work, a lot of really good work that I encourage people to check out. Also, just want to shout out Foreign Languages Press. Go to their website. It's a great place to find a ton of foundational Marxist literature, as well as work within the kind of Maoist, you know modern Maoist, I guess I would say, literature as well. So anyway, JMP, good to be with you, man. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, great to be here.
Right on. So I guess we start with memories of this or early kind of encounters with this film. Obviously, it came out when I was like 1.5. So I did not see this movie in the 80s even. And I probably didn't see it until I was like a teenager. Um, and definitely, found it to be an interesting film. I think of the films that we've done so far through this series, it's one of the ones that's probably most interesting to me in terms of like the politics and, the kind of critiques or subject matter that's being dealt with. Um, but I don't, you know, it wasn't one for me that I was like, as I think both of you probably have more of a relationship to this film and have probably seen it more times. I think I probably thought it was like kind of a cool horror movie, but not much more than that at the time. And rewatching it this time, preparing for this, yeah, very, very interesting, movie. And I'm looking forward to hearing both of you talk about it, because I know both of you from your respective, I mean, JMP, you're in the same city that this film is based in, and definitely also I know you have a real interest in like kind of the body horror genre, and so that'll be really interesting to talk about a little bit. And then obviously Mtume as a critic and as a filmmaker, I'm sure there's stuff in to get into here. So that's all I'll say up front. But yeah, Mtume, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so Cronenberg, the director, was someone I knew in maybe the late 80s, early 90s, because I saw The Dead Zone very young. The Dead Zone would be on um TV a lot on cable. So probably like 89, 90. I was like a little too scared to watch it. And then I think I watched it when I was like maybe like 11 or something like that. So probably like in like the early 90s. And The Fly. The Fly is the other movie that I was really attached to by Cronenberg. And I loved The Fly as a teenager and all that type of stuff. I was just like so into it. And I think I hadn't seen any other Cronenberg movies for a long time until I went to college. And a homie of mine was like, he kind of like shitting on me, but you ain't seen Videodrome, B? Like, oh, you think you know shit? You ain't seen Videodrome? And I was like, no. So he had like a video cassette of it, and I watched it, and I was just like, whoa, this is like the joint. I was like, oh man, Videodrome, yeah, yeah. And I was just into it. Like, kind of like this is just some wild stuff and TV taking over your body and exploding people. And I was just into it. I didn't really think much of it. It was like probably like my first or second year in college. And then probably in my 20s, I revisited it when I started like probably reading like some like media philosophy stuff, like media analysis, which we'll definitely get into because like I think there's some definitely there is a key figure in media analysis who's directly referenced, not well for the most part referenced in this film. And I started watching it more. And I think also in the aughts, like in New York, in the kind of like underground art scene that I was in, Videodrome was kind of seen as like a pillar film. Especially when I got into like movie making, it became one of those like pieces that would always be discussed or referenced by certain people in certain things. I have friends who work in like horror, body horror. This is like one of those like pillar pieces. And yeah, I loved it. I loved it. I was like, this is something I would always reference, get into. Even where, and this we'll get into, I'm not like a Cronenberg stan. I have kind of like a ceiling for Cronenberg a little bit. I would say this is my favorite. This and The Fly, but probably this is my favorite Cronenberg film personally. Um, um, but yeah, this stayed with me, and I think in the last few years, it's been interesting to me because when I did do some digging, because I never did digging on it, like I didn't read like papers on it and stuff like that. I do have a really good colleague. Shout out to my homie Nathan Holmes, who's a cinema studies colleague at Purchase with me. He's Canadian, and he put me onto some stuff about public access in Canada and stuff like that. He's been working on a book about it, so it got into some discussions, and we talked about like different well, then we started talking about like Marshall McLuhan, which we'll definitely talk about with this because he's like a big figure for the film. And I started thinking about it, like what it represented. And I remember a couple of years ago, and I'll talk about this, I was like, oh, this is a vision of a world that is interesting to me only in that it's like the world that we live in a particular kind of way. For me, that is like not good. Right, on either side. Like I didn't see, because even when I watched it, I wasn't like, yeah, I was like, oh man, this is a warring factions. Where the hell do I sit? Where the hell do people actually sit in here and find any kind of thing to root around? So it's just become a kind of an interesting film to me. I don't want to give too much because we can talk more about that. But yeah, it's definitely something that, stays with me at a pretty high level.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, my memories are kind of like similar. I didn't watch this when it first came out. I was also very young. I wasn't 1, but I was 5. Right? There's no way my parents would let me watch something like Videodrome at 5, or I probably I wouldn't wanted to see it then. It was more like at the end of the 80s. I still hadn't watched Videodrome, but that was the first time I would have encountered David Cronenberg. Like Mtume, it was The Fly, right? Because it was like the big film. I saw The Fly, and also my friend's older brothers had a copy of Scanners, so I saw that, it's at like 10 or 11, and then also The Dead Zone, as you mentioned, because that was like one where like in 88 and 89 when I was like in grade 7 and 8, it was like this all these kids were into Stephen King, right? So it was like a Stephen King adaptation. I think my friends and I just watched it for that reason. But it's also funny. I mean, recently I was in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is by Niagara Falls on the Canadian side, and that's where the gazebo from Dead Zone was in. I was like, it's the Dead Zone gazebo. Seen it, right? But yeah, Videodrome I encountered at the end of high school when I was starting to get into these kind of films, and I had friends. Like I think at that time, the other big David Cronenberg film I'd watched, a few years earlier was Naked Lunch. And interestingly, Videodrome and Naked Lunch are still probably my 2 favorite Cronenberg films. And I saw Videodrome. I thought it was amazing, and I got it on VHS, which is really appropriate for for the film's understanding of technology. And I had that VHS tape of Videodrome for years, and I watched it many times. But then it's like kind of the end of my MA and the beginning of my doctorate is like my VCR broke down. I got rid of my whole VHS tape collection. There's like no reason to have it anymore. And so I think it was the last time I saw Videodrome for years, even though I'd watched it so many times. So going back and rewatching it, and also watching like a quality copy in terms of images versus a VHS one, was also, I mean, a lot of it was just renewing memories. As I was like, oh, I remember this line, I remember that line. But I mean, yeah, like Cronenberg is someone as like, kind of a Canadian, into kind of Canadian independent cinema. You're kind of like, oh, this is horror cinema. You're like, this is the guy to watch, right? And like you, it's like kind of like there's things I really like about Cronenberg, but like it's like there's some things, some movies I just don't really care about. But there's some that is like it'll be like oh, this is really interesting, right? So it's kind of, and I respect kind of what he's doing, but also it's like in Toronto, right? You get this kind of shot that he's shot around there, and rewatching this film of 1983 Toronto, where I live, and trying to pinpoint like things based on changes of like gentrification and things like that was really interesting.
Awesome. Yeah. And yeah, you guys reminded me for sure. I mean, The Fly was probably the biggest for me too. I watched that a lot as a young teen, with my friends and stuff like that, and was in a kind of Jeff Goldblum phase as well at that time. So yeah, so I guess we should talk a little bit about some of the folks involved. I mean, obviously the chat has already brought up, James Woods, and why are we talking about a film that stars James Woods and that sort of thing. I mean, we're certainly not talking about it because of James Woods for sure. Yeah. So, Mtume, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the different pieces involved here?
I mean, interesting. James Woods is interesting in that it does explain how films get made of that period, because Woods wasn't quite the person we know him to be now in terms of like recognition at that time. Um he had already been nominated for a few things, but it was like kind of for Cronenberg like a step up film. So Cronenberg, honestly, we could do 2 hours on Cronenberg's history, and we probably should not do that. But Josh, if you want to jump in and throw anything, I throw in here about Cronenberg, you think it's interesting, please. So Cronenberg, Canadian native, right? I mean, if you source people and ask who's the best um filmmaker in Canadian history, most like it'll average out to him. Like I was actually at a festival some years ago, and Guy Madden and Adam Egoyan, two legendary Canadian filmmakers, and someone asked that question, who's the greatest Canadian filmmaker of all time, and they both said David. They just went like, they said David, right? They were just like, they just defaulted at that. Like Cronenberg in many ways is like an institution of filmmaking. Like he has a particular, I think, kind of like legend and a following of people that, in many ways is well deserved. In many ways is very much, I think, also like a product of like, I think, a period of filmmaking in the 80s and the 70s as well that I think is like really interesting, which I think we can like dive into a little bit here. But yeah, like native of Canada, he, kind of like his upbringing comes in like English and different types of things of visual arts, and he has a very big like artsy kind of way of like self-development within there where he went to college. Coincidentally, when he went to university was the same time Marshall McLuhan, which is a person we will talk about, I'm sure, enough in this, was actually teaching, though there's no evidence that they actually took a classes with him. But McLuhan also being a Canadian, I don't know if he's a Toronto native, but I know McLuhan also being from Canada. So there's a kind of Canadian thing also happened, I think, in the philosophy of this. So for Cronenberg's career, a lot of his early stuff, things like Rabid and Shivers, these were like films that he did on very lower budgets and through something that's called like the tax shelter situation. And for people who don't know what that was it was basically this period in Canadian filmmaking, which actually ended, I think, right before Videodrome started. Like this Videodrome was like one of the first Canadian films to happen like after that. But it was a thing where you could write off the movie completely, right? You could like write off, you could like 100% of the film in taxes. So it gave opportunity for a lot of these small movies to be made. I've talked to some cinema studies people because they do this thing where like, that was the reason all these great movies, all these really interesting movies got made. And there's definitely a lot more different events that happened, right, with it. Because I don't, those kind of like simple arguments because of this like money thing, all these great movies get made is a little weird of an argument to make. But it definitely had a major kind of like influence and impetus, right, for it to happen. And it really helped him kind of like make a kind of, name for himself. He had films like The Brood, Rabid, Shivers, Scanners. This is probably the last one he made before that. And this kind of, he begins like a following. And it's important to kind of also like point out that like this was like a growing culture or a grown culture out of the late 70s into the early 80s in the US and Canada of these kinds of films. You had like, really, really like medium budget sci-fi-ish, quasi-political at times, some commentary socially. People like Abel Ferrara come out of this as well in New York. It's like a big cultural kind of thing that's happening, a lot of these films. And, Cronenberg is like a leading figure kind of in that. So this is a film that he does after the tax shelter thing. It is 50% financed by Canadian, but also 50% by US. So it was his first film to be financed by US money, though this and The Dead Zone come out the same year. So it's like so it's a little, it's like part of like the whole thing. Let's see what else is important. He famously turned down Return of the Jedi. He didn't want to direct it. Yeah. He said that he didn't want to do it because he didn't really want to be in franchise. And he didn't want to be like doing basically something completely what someone else was doing. But he was also planning on doing Videodrome for a few years before that. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to plug. Next week we're doing Return of the Jedi with Samantha Youssef. So another Toronto.
That's why I was like when you had said the last talk on when you were doing your last talk on Short Circuit that you're doing Return of the Jedi after. I was like, oh, that's so perfect because Cronenberg turned that down.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah, and then yeah, I mean, there's other people, like another really, I think, influential person. Actually, I don't know if you want to add anything about Cronenberg. There's like other people like Rick Baker we could talk about in a minute. But I don't know if there's other things on Cronenberg that people want to bring up or bring into the house.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a lot of the stuff about kind of the what he was doing at the time, and the turning down of Return of the Jedi. I mean, he recently had a comment. People asked him about that, and because it became a bit of a legend, so he kind of clarified that it was actually just like a phone call where they phoned him and said, we're interested to have you are you interested in being the director of Revenge of the Jedi? Because that's the old term. And he made a joke about how they had to change the title because apparently Jedi shouldn't be getting revenge, right? And then he just said, all he said was like, I prefer not to work on films that are like someone else's project. And they were just like, thanks, and hung up on. It's like no further conversation. He's like, that was it, right? It was just that was the kind of thing as well. I mean, it is interesting. This came out at the same time as Dead Zone. I mean, Dead Zone is one of those ones that I so many times in the past I've forgotten that it was David Cronenberg, because it's not written by him, right? And it's based on and it's like I think a lot of that was like the Dino De Laurentiis money was funded into this one, and Videodrome was the first film that's like actually that he wrote, and as you pointed out, he'd been working on it for years, where he was getting the biggest budget he'd ever seen, right? Because of that tax shelter thing, and because people bringing in James Woods. As a point of James Woods back then also had like he was seen more as a kind of a left liberal. He was Democratic. I mean, the thing I was looking like what happened, because he's now this raving reactionary lunatic, right? But apparently what broke his brain, and this is really funny, was Bill Clinton. The Monica Lewinsky scandal, and yet now he's totally fine with these sexual scandals and is a sex pest as well. So it's like the thing that broke him is the thing that he is too, which is weird. But I mean, back then it was like he was this up and coming person, which kind of left liberal politics. What else? Oh yeah, the other thing I might want to mention this too is that Cronenberg, even since like The Brood on, he has worked with this kind of the same rotating cast of production teams. He makes he's actually he was asked about this, and he's kind of like, look, it's like I work with these people and they're friends. I'm not like he talked about how kind of the American style is to abandon people and jump on the next new cool cinematographer, but he's like, these are people I've worked with. We have a good and so it's like I tend, unless they have other jobs, I'll work with the same people, right? And so like one of the big ones, right, is Howard Shore, who becomes this major musician for films. He scored Lord of the Rings, but he started with like The Brood, and he's done every single. I think The Dead Zone might be the only one he didn't do, but he's done every single Cronenberg score since then, because he's also from Toronto. They were friends, and it's kind of interesting. See, that's where I mean the soundtrack for Videodrome is pretty cool too, as it is. But yeah, I mean also like, thinking about this and where it was shot in Toronto, like I went and looked up a lot of the places, and what's funny is Spectacular Optical that won the front for Videodrome, which we'll talk about. It's now that space they shot in. It's now a Value Buds, which is like the dollar store of dispensaries. They're like all over the place in Toronto, and the place that was the street mission where the Oblivions run out of, I think it's like the Cathode Ray street mission or something like that. It's now a theater, but not a movie theater, but like a stage theater called like Factory Theater. It actually became that theater right when Videodrome was in the theaters. It was empty before then, and I was like, the location is actually like right beside like friends of ours. They live right beside it, and they're older friends. They were like these. Well, one of them passed away recently, but they are like probably David Cronenberg's generation. Carl Beveridge and Carol Condi. They're these big Toronto leftist artists, really involved in kind of the new communist movement and things like that. And they had been living in that location for their whole life, so they were there when it shot. So I called Carl. I was like, do you have any memories of this? And he's like, well, people were renting out that place, because he's like, in like 1981, it was still a nunnery, and then it was empty. The nunnery left, and in that period, it was being rented out. So he did tell me I could make up a story and he'd back it, but I'm not gonna do that. But that's like interesting spaces in Toronto that I was like looking at that as well.
So yeah, a couple of things on the Woods point. I think that's like a kind of what I was trying to like bring in is that. So when you're in these kind of situations, it's interesting to think about this film, because the other thing about Cronenberg in this period was you're coming out of the late 70s going into the early 80s, and you have these like characteristics of films that are dealing with kind of like subversive, quote unquote, subjects like sex, violence and sex, you know, kind of together, culty kind of expressions. And there is, like with all other kind of things, I think within US society, and you're kind of dealing with this like kind of like middle financing of everything, there's always this idea of like how we're going, like, is this gonna buy, right? So you have someone like Larry Cohen, who was a big filmmaker in the not a big indie filmmaker in the 70s, movies like God Told Me to, Bone, stuff like that. What's the movie he did with Eric Bogosian? I think I always forget the name. I really like that film. But so there's movies like that, right? Like, and Cronenberg, he's kind of in this position where he has to figure out. Cool, they brought Woods to him. They were like, we could afford him. He's up and coming. Woods hadn't had a lot of really big starring roles, be a film that he could kind of like get a lead in. What's interesting is Woods' big turn is the next year when he does Once Upon a Time in America, which is a movie that we have to do slog through 4 hours of that one, but that's a whole other conversation. We can talk about that another time. But yeah, so like that's kind of how those things get connected, right? And yeah, and I think it's also big to bring in Cronenberg's kind of explorations, because I think it like really kind of sets stone in this film. And a lot of it has to do with the body, the idea of the body, but also technology and the new technologies and the externalizing of things. So the idea of like body horror being a thing of like when things become externalized, no longer like the internal, right? And the kind of meshing of like new forms, new things, new social relationships, and also like the ideas of like pleasure and pain, right? That would be like a big thing of like his film, which I don't particularly care for. Crash. I know Crash is like a film that people absolutely adore. I've personally never really dug into it. I think Videodrome was a better exploration of it. Film people, y'all can come for me on that one. We're good. I'm not really a fan of Crash, but that's part of the Cronenberg like exploration. And you see Videodrome really kind of like set, and not that he hadn't done it before, but this to me I think is his most successful, or the beginning of like the recognition of like that kind of exploration that he was doing. Yeah.
Yeah, so JMP, I mean, yeah, go ahead. I know anything
I
you
just
want
wanted to add
to
something
get into, but also add to that. Yeah.
about the body horror stuff, because you know we might lose the thread on that. I mean, it is worth noting that like David Cronenberg actually he doesn't like the term body horror. I mean, it was part to name his films, and he always talks as the viewer response, but he has felt that's not what he's doing. I mean, obviously the death of the author and all that, but it is important because I think it was like one. You know, I encountered this again. I had to go back and look at it. Is that I watched? I don't know if Mtume, you might be familiar. I don't know if Jared is with Julia Ducournau, the French director who did Titane. Her most recent film, Alpha, and you know she had some interviews. I love Alpha. I thought it was my favorite film of the year in many ways. Yeah, I think you said yes, but you're muted.
I haven't seen that one yet. I've been mixed on her first two films, but I haven't seen this one yet.
Alpha's worth it because it's less body horror and more like kind of a mourning thing. Plus, she's also very open about her Algerian heritage in it. So there's a whole stuff about like race in France and this stuff too. So it's very, you know, my wife really loved it, who doesn't like body horror. She found it really moving, especially with the stuff about mourning and the connection with, because she's Arab as well. So the Algerian stuff really moved her in it. But I mean, Ducournau in this interview, she was talking about body horror, and she talks about being influenced by David Cronenberg, and now she doesn't like it. And she says, I like David Cronenberg's term. She says, I haven't found this in a Cronenberg interview, but she says that he refers to it as body conflict, right? That's the way that he likes to think about it. And interviews where he talks about the body. I mean, I saw a recent one where he's talking about shrouds, and he was talking about like, he's like, look, it's just like I'm an atheist and a materialist. So like we don't have a soul, we have bodies. So for him, approaching things with bodies breaking down is the way that he makes sense of stuff. He also has said other times that he said maybe venereal horror is a good term for it as well. But yeah, it's interesting to think about that. I mean, and also I'd like to say, like you, I'm not the biggest fan of Crash. I respect Crash. I think there's things, and I love J.G. Ballard. I mean, Crash isn't my favorite Ballard novel, but I like that Crash exists, and I have a respect for it. But it's not a film that I'm like, oh, I really want to see that again.
Yeah. I have not actually seen Crash. I've seen the bad U.S. Crash, but I haven't. Didn't it win an Oscar? That
It
terrible
is
movie. I
better
know
than that, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely better than that. Whenever I bring up Cronenberg's Crash, people think that one. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, no. Just to clarify, we're not talking about that movie. Yeah. Um, all right. Well, JMP, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to lay out at the outset before we start digging into the film itself.
No, I think that was it. It was just running off the body horror thing. I mean, everything else is going to come up in terms of the movie plot, right? And the things that Mtume has talked about McLuhan, and that we'll be talking about that when it comes up. Also, I don't want to lose the thread of the John Carpenter comment, because there's an interesting, almost a rebuttal that Cronenberg has to it as well. So,
can we do that real quick, because I don't know the rebuttal.
Okay, so it wasn't direct, but it happened afterwards, and he wasn't speaking. No one brought up that thing, but what he did, he tells this story of how in the kind of so we know John Carpenter's story is that he goes this thing, and then Cronenberg is like acting like he's an artist and all this kind of stuff. Well, Cronenberg says that he went to this when there was this buzz around like all of their films. I think this is like late 80s or early 90s. He's on this panel with them. I think it's late 80s. And he talks about he after the panel, they go to him. It's like I think it was Wes Craven, John Carpenter, and someone else. I don't know who else was on it. And they said, "You're talking as if you're an artist. You can't say that here." And his comment was like, "Well, we are artists." And then he went on about how there's this like kind of anti-intellectual American culture that wants to see horror films not artistic, and that they were playing they weren't bold enough to do that. And he's like, I've always seen my work and kind of connected to like, European films, French New Wave and stuff. So he was just kind of saying like that they got mad at him for. So I think it's part of the same. There's the same kind of history where he's just kind of like, oh, it's these Americans and their refusal to talk about themselves as artists. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also in that interview, and I have massive love for John Carpenter. He's definitely someone I love, but there's definitely also a sense of that, like the two homies who grew older and like they're just a different pathways in life, like Carpenter just doesn't like the movie world at all, right? So he's just generally just like all of this, and Cronenberg still has a very vibrant career. I mean, and has switched very much. The movies that he does now are very different in many ways, though he's been trying to kind of re-reference them, I think, lately. And then there's also the presence of his son, which we could also talk about at another time, but not now. There's also like, his son's films, which kind of like hearken to him in kind of ways. So there is this like vibe that still exists. Yeah, I think one thing to think about the development of this film, and we can kind of get into it. So one of the things that Cronenberg did say that I think is really interesting, he said a lot of the early inspiration for the film came from like when he would see like early signals, like video signals, pirated signals. And I think it's a thing that I think bring it overall for the film, because like that's like a world that doesn't really exist anymore, right? And like many people don't really understand this idea of like the pirate TV stations. It's fun. I don't know if people have checked out this book, Video Freak. Anybody know this book? Yeah, it's about the first pirate TV station in the Catskills. Abby Hoffman is a name that many people who watch the millennial space will know. Abby Hoffman was a big person within that space, right? In this kind of like pirate TV space, there was a high political kind of contingent to it, mixed with a lot of other things, different types of politics, from anarchist politics to communist politics to no politics at all, just wanting to be free love, liberated, all types of stuff happening, right? And Cronenberg said when he was young, because people don't remember, like TV used to go off. I used to think of that Lenny Williams line. I watched TV till TV went off, right? Like in his song, right? And there would be like these like signals that would come in, right? And he said he was always worried that he would see something that would like freak him out or something like that. And he said he wanted to think about that. And I think that kind of also goes into like the push and pull of the film, because Cronenberg, I think one of the unfair criticisms that happen from people who don't like Cronenberg is that he's just like a kind of like a smut peddler, right? Or he's just like a kind of an edgelord kind of person. And no, I actually find he's a lot more conflicted right? I'm not saying you couldn't have a criticism of how he's doing these things, but I do think his whole thing, I think I'm glad you brought in that body conflict. I had never heard that. I think that's kind of what it is. He's like playing out the body conflict like in the movie, right? The conflict of too much stimulation, but we have to confront the stimulation head on. Do we hide it? Do we not hide it? Like, what do we actually do? Do we just become it and then take it on and then become the radical faction that's going to fight the overlord, right? It's like it's his conflict that you're actively watching, and I think that kind of goes throughout his career in many different ways. Some I think more successful than others. Personally, it's hard, I think, or weird when you become a name and people like literally follow you and bow to you when when they see you every day as like the god of a certain type of movie making. But I think that's a thing to kind of situate with like the film, and he had worked on it for like a really long time, and was like really dedicated in this being like one of his first films to when he had like a new budget to be able to kind of stamp a way that he was going to like communicate with the world.
Yeah, it was say like working on it a long time, but I was reading like kind of Tim Lucas's book on recollections of this. It's and it's like he was working on it while they were shooting it. He kept rewriting scenes and because he was this was like a pet project for him for a while. Yeah.
I just want to add for folks, especially younger people who might watch this film, like I think you referenced it earlier on, Mtume, but it is important to understand that all of the technology in the film is like the cutting edge, right? So like 1983, like having a satellite that would be able to pick up, signals from other parts of the world, like that, was a sign that you had some money and resources to be able to do that. It was essentially the most advanced technology within the kind of broadcast world. It's also really important to understand that, and this is one of the things that I found really interesting in this film to think about now, right? Is because now we're in this age of like super advanced digital technology, right? And so, you know, like Sina Rahmani from East as a podcast has talked to me about this before. It's like this thing is basically cybernetically attached to us at this point. Like we carry these things everywhere, right? And they are not only sort of listening to us, right? And you know, both probably for the government, right? But also to like figure out what to market to us and things like this, right? Um, and to respond to our needs, desires, what it thinks we want, right? Especially if we think about kind of so-called AI, right? Um, but I think that that's one of the things that's really fascinating within this film is that kind of an ability to predict in certain ways, like where this was headed, um, while still obviously being a film that's working within analog technologies, essentially, right? VHS tapes, UHF signals, satellites. Like these are not things that are operating in 1983 really along the lines of digital technology. But nonetheless, like kind of being able to think about the like dynamics of this in 1983 in ways that really still resonate and perhaps resonate even more clearly now, I think is a really interesting thing about this movie.
So yeah, so the film, it has I love the start of the film, right? You get the kind of especially now you get like the classic it's Civic TV, right? You get this like old classic font, right? But the line of what Civic TV is, the one you take to bed with you. And like it's funny because like you can watch it and like let it kind of gloss over, but the minute you actually think about it, you go, well, what the fuck does that mean? Right? Right? It's like the first thing, right? You're like, what? Okay, interesting, right? The one they take to bed with you. So you see this screen, it's that. And then it goes on and you see a woman, right? And you see this woman and she's basically giving a guy named Max, who you haven't seen yet. And it's like his morning notes, right? It's like his morning kind of like things he has to do for the day, but also like morning motivation. And this is interesting coming in 83, right? Because think of all the things that we have that kind of mirror that in our society. I mean, not even like that much years after you begin to get video calls and things like that, or like the kind of imagination of that. But this also comes in the idea of a video cassette, right? Which you find out later that it is a video cassette. So it's like a planned kind of thing. And a guy like orienting his life around these kind of morning messages through a video to kind of remind him of what he does. It's also through like a woman who's like his assistant, which I think is really important. She kind of orients his existence and letting him kind of know, right, what it is. And like they make her kind of playful a bit, you know. She says, I know I'm the vision of someone, but it's a kind of like playfulness. So kind of like setting an orientation of how we're going to interact here. But it's very funny, and it has that kind of Cronenbergian, like lightness, but also weirdness, and you don't quite know like what you're kind of getting into. He doesn't, he starts with an unobvious thing, but he's also like laying the ground out. I don't know if anybody wants to add to anything to that.
Josh, you want to add some stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the Civic TV thing, right? I mean, it's and this will maybe get into it a bit more when we talk about James Wood's character, Max Wren, but Civic TV is modeled after this TV station in Canada called City TV, which now became a big broad, but at that time it was a UHF channel, right? And it was the kind of idea that the TV you go to bed with is because it was one of the ones that pioneered playing things at midnight that were like exactly like this, that were like, softcore porn and things like that, to try to be able to get this, that was able to get like money and watchers, right? And the guy that started it, Moses Znaimer, I feel like Max Wren is maybe David Cronenberg's view of the kind of person Moses Znaimer was, who was this guy who was exactly like, I'm gonna do all this piratey stuff, and then eventually he, uses it to create kind of a new hip TV series for kids, or not for kids, but like for whatever. But it's just like it's kind of civic TV, city TV. It kind of feels like that's what he's doing, especially since Moses Znaimer was like this kind of, he was really into Marshall McLuhan as well, but kind of like that, but kind of like the person that would be into Marshall McLuhan that also wanted to become a millionaire.
One thing to just add to on this, I mean, obviously there is that I'm very interested in, kind of the Canada specific element of it, but I do think, just to kind of reiterate one thing too, like I grew up in an area where we had 3 over the air network television channels, right? And then like, if you were closer to the local city, right, you might get a couple more, right? But like, so this idea of a UHF channel, we probably should say a little bit more about what this is, but basically there's a technical side of it that I really can't get into because I don't really understand it enough. I mean, on our old transmitters, like the key channels were like usually between like 3 and 12 or something like that, or 4 and 12, because 3 was like what you play video games on or whatever. But like, and then your UHF signals would often be like a higher number on like your actual like TV dial. It's kind of like radio, right? Like people might be able to think about this in terms of radio, of like, you have your FM and your AM, you have your like channels that are in like the lower numbers, and then the ones that are up in the higher and stuff like that. And there was a delineation there, but it also was more often to be like an independent, not like a lot of capital, like it's not going to be broadcasting like NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, type stuff, right? It's going to be owned by somebody locally, and they're going to play different kinds of stuff to try to make some kind of name for themselves. And it can produce what JMP kind of talked about there, where like nowadays some of these channels are like the channel itself still exists, but it's been like bought up by like Clear Channel or something else, right? It's become kind of its own, it's kind of fit into the overall network. But in this time, in the 70s and the 80s, it kind of would have been operating outside. And it's not necessarily the same thing as pirate. Like there is this relationship that James Woods' character has to pirate television, right? Because he's kind of looking for stuff that pushes the envelope. Which pirate television would be basically just people who are legally taking over signals and broadcasting stuff, right? But a UHF like had some kind of license, but would be trying to fit in like weird stuff. I mean, it's actually another movie that we will have to do, which I do think is 80s, which is Weird Al Yankovic's UHF, which is a very ridiculous movie, but also kind of gets into some of these dynamics of like, what is a UHF station?
Yeah, I was as soon as you were describing UHF, I was thinking of that movie.
I remember that movie. Such a weird film, and I don't even think I got it at 9 years old. But yeah. But to your point, Jay, I think that's another thing, and I think people who have a better handle on like broadcast media history would know better than me. But this is also like a really interesting thing about independence and the idea of independence coming from the 70s and how it was kind of thought about, the politics of independence in terms of media, especially if you think about cinema and then into broadcasting, and as broadcasting technology kind of grows and the abilities for it and the things like that, you get into this kind of weird world that kind of blends with the politics of the period, right? Because independence, and this is kind of like thinking about like even in cinema, where independent film in the 70s was largely connected to like a certain politics to a certain degree. There was definitely some people who weren't, but there was definitely like a certain kind of politics in like independent, real subversive stuff. But then when you kind of get into the late 70s, early 80s, independence becomes a much more like large container, right? And really, the prominence of it, a lot of it has to do with capital, who's able to get like a broadcast signal, who able to get a channel, how can you sell? Because like the first thing you see, you see like Max Wren, Woods' character, he's like, in his crib, shirt off, eating like pizza from the night, and he's looking at these like photos of a naked woman, right? In like a black and white, and he's like smutting, like he got like his the tomato sauce from like the pizza on it. He's like, you could tell he's like this like nasty dude, right? And the first thing you do, and if you don't know, she tells me he has to go has his first meeting, and it looked like he's about to do like a drug deal. He's like walking into a hotel. Homie got like the neck up. I'm like, is he about to go buy some rock? Like, what is happening here? Right? And he walks in, and there's a couple of Japanese guys, and I think making them Japanese also is very, 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 very on purpose, right? And they're basically selling, they want to sell like an underground TV series that has to do with sex, right? And sexual content. And so they're kind of showing you this idea of like an underground market, right? The underground market of like things that are subversive that will kind of go underground. Can you broadcast it? Can you not broadcast it? Right. And yeah, and it's like, but also like this idea that it has a kind of like artistic thing. They're like, how many episodes you have? He's like, I have like 13. He's like, I want to see the last one. Like he wants to like see the kind of like style and stuff. But I think it's also really like showing the terrain, because I think the other kind of concept that I think it existed then, and I think the movie really deals with, that probably the next like really big war that was going to happen, like hot war, was going to happen in the media sphere, right? There was going to be like some kind of like hot, violent war that was going to take place within the media sphere, right? Not like network where someone comes in and like, kills Howard Beale on television. No, it's going to be like in like the actual media is going to become war. And, that's reflective on a lot of the kind of, I think, things that influence this movie.
I like the comment of being like a drug deal, because I just watched it 2 weeks ago, but there's so much in it. I just like or a week ago, but weren't the porn VHSs in like a briefcase too? Like a briefcase you'd find like either money or drugs, and it's like this illicit. And it was Samurai Dreams. That was the name of this series, Samurai Dreams.
Which also coincidentally, Cronenberg shot all of the episodes. So I haven't watched them, but they're on the I have the Criterion Blu-ray, and they're there. He has like 8 of the episodes that he actually shot, a bunch of them. He was going to use more of them But I was like, and I'm just like, I don't know. I never watched it. I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I can watch this.
I think it was like when he was like reading when he was writing the script at the same time, he began with shooting those episodes and also shooting we'll talk soon, the Videodrome like broadcast, right? That's what he started with. While he was still writing and trying to figure everything out.
Yeah, which is smart. From a filmmaker's perspective, it's actually a very like smart move to do. But like the fact that he shot like nearly an entire series that we see a clip from is hilarious.
That's wild.
Yeah. So, let's see. Yeah, so so then he takes it back to his business partner. So you find that Max has like basically 3 business partners that he works with, right? And he has like this station, and like there's like definitely people there, and it's like a working station there. And that sequence is really interesting because like they're watching this like sexual content, and the 3 of them are just like the 2 guys on the side are like this. They're like their vibe is like not plussed. Someone makes this really like fucked up comment that says Oriental sex is like unnatural, right? There's that comment, right, which is really awful. And the other guy, I forgot what his comment was. It was something about like he wasn't getting turned on or something like that, or like I forgot what he says. Do you remember?
Yeah, he says it's something like too much class. It's bad for sex.
Right. Yes, that's the line, right? And Ren asks, like, can we get away with this? Do we want to get away with it? And I think that's really important because a lot of what this film is about this idea of like the censors, but also like what's beyond censorship. And what's like beyond like censorship is probably this like gateway to something that's like hot, more stimulating, right? That like the actual world like forbids us. So it's like, from like an old 60s, 70s argument, but like this new level of it forbids us from like a kind of like stimulating kind of experience, right? And Ren's whole thing is like, look, I don't think, I mean, part of it is his own stimulation, but a lot of it really has to do with like, will this shit sell? Like, will people get into it, right? Like, they don't make it. I don't think Cronenberg really makes bones that this guy is he's a capitalist. He's a small level, he's like a small level dude trying to make his station as successful. What's gonna basically get the people into it? And he thinks this stuff is just too slow and too artsy, right? For people to kind of enjoy.
Yeah, it's very interesting too to think about this in the context of like the 80s and even the 90s of, like it kind of like this channel kind of reminds me of like the prototype of like Cinemax. You know what I mean? Like we're gonna have action movies and then we're gonna have like really soft porn late at night, right? And that's gonna be, kind of the thing. And like, like we grew up in that era of just like, you watch action movies and then at a certain point it's like, oh, like soft porn just comes on the TV. And it's I don't know. I mean, it is wild to kind of watch this film in that context. And I think that there is something to, just to add one other thing, of this kind of quests for what's stimulating and all of this. I mean, there are a lot of resonances that I was thinking about as I was watching this too, of even something like YouTube, right? Which is like, obviously there is like a strict censorship regime on YouTube of like what you can't, show and all of this kind of stuff. But nonetheless, like they're behind the scenes, Google is constantly encouraging you, like, do this, this, and this to make your shit the most stimulating that it possibly can be to attract as many viewers. And this is what they like, and this is how they want it like put together and all this kind of stuff. And so it is like, I don't know. I mean, it's a way, it's like a web of these kind of things. And that's, I guess, what's interesting in some degree about Max Ren too, is that obviously, yes, like you're right, Mtume. I mean, he's a capitalist and he's trying to figure out like what base instincts can he tap into that will, like, not even that people necessarily think they want it, but when it comes on, they won't be able to turn away, is kind of like the sort of logic that's operating there. And it's interesting.
It's, I mean, Max Terrain, I think this shows up in a lot of like Cronenberg's early work. He's kind of like, he's also this kind of figure of the libidinal economy, right? And that's what he wants to profit on. And you have that kind of idea, like, I know Mtume, you brought up like the brood before we started this too, is like, I remember there's like that character there, the psychoanalyst that's in it that wrote that book, The Shape of Rage. It's kind of like the different way, but it's also that kind of like person that really is invested in this libidinal economy, and Ren kind of is like that in a different way, like through video and things like that.
So one of the things I also really like about the movie is how sleek it is, right? It's actually like I actually think the film does not have a wasted scene, personally. I think it's actually like really, really, because then you go right from that to where you meet Harlan, who is like a really important character in the film. And he works for Ren. He's like working on his satellite. He's like, getting the satellite together. You see the big satellite before you get in there to kind of like situate it what it is. And he's doing some work, and he shows Max a show that is called Videodrome, that he finds from a feed, right? Who has like a scrambler, like they scramble the scrambler. He tells him all this kind of stuff, like techno stuff, right? And Max like, okay, yeah, we'll see it, right? And it comes on, and it's like, and when you see it, like it comes through with the buzzy feed, it's like full on violence. Like it's just like raw violence, right? And Max is like, at first he's like, okay, this is interesting. Like, what do you know about it? Like, where is it coming from? He tells him Malaysia, right? He's like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah, this could be interesting. Like he's like, okay, yeah, start recording it. Maybe it could be something that we could use, right? And the other thing about the film is like things that happen earlier really become important later, right? So like this moment that's seemingly kind of like a teaser is actually like really a plot hinger for the entire movie, right? Not just in like the kind of, it actually is like physically drives the plot forward, right? And this is where like the movie like being really sleek, I think, is like a really, really, really like important thing. But yeah, and then Harlan has the thing of always calling him Patron, which is like it's just always like, it actually makes me hate Harlan, and you should hate Harlan in the movie, but like it's always like Patron.
Spoiler alert.
But you know what I'm saying? I was like, Patron. I was like, who is this hipster? Like,
yeah, but it's like there's something about that guy that says the kind of shit that he thinks is cool, but he's like this computer nerd like kind of person. It fits that character. But
it's a perfect character. It's so good. Patron, right? He's like, oh yeah, you cannot fool the something of the airwaves. You're like, all right, bro. Okay, you are the baddest dude, right? So, and I think you go from that right into the talk show. And I think we'll have a lot here. Like the talk show is like a big thing. So you leave there, and you basically see Max, and he's on like a talk show stage. And you see first you see Max, and he's like, talking to someone you don't see off screen. And then the shot is really, I think, important personally, because you see Max, and then it pans over where you see Nikki Brand, played by oh my gosh, what's her name?
Debbie Harry.
Debbie Harry from Blondie, right? But the first time you see her is through a television screen, which I think is really cinematically important in the film, right? And then there's a cut over to our friend Professor Brian O'Blivion, who's actually on a television screen with his name, right? And you're like, okay, and he's making his faces, right? Right? And then you get the talk show. Go ahead, Josh. Yeah.
He has that line right there, but he's on the television where he says that, like, that he's like, that's why I refuse to appear on television, except on television.
It's so good. It's so good. So yeah, they're on this talk show. There's like a talk show host. She's a woman, and he's there with also this woman, Nikki Brand, who played by Debbie Harry, and Brian O'Blivion, who is the other person. And they're basically like kind of grilling Max first about like his role in doing like public television. And he says like the first things he says is like, it's a matter of economics. I'm like, it's like a real typical argument. Like, I'm the small guy. I got to give people what they want. But then she asks him, but do you think you're like playing into like, the depravity of humanity? And he says, well, I'm giving them the outlet, right? I'm the outlet. The argument of if we put the sex and violence on television, maybe people won't do it in the streets, right? Which becomes I think to this day is still a very constant argument. And I think Cronenberg putting that argument out there is interesting because there's been ways that I think people have said that that's what Cronenberg's argument is. And I don't think he's ever made that argument. Like, his really lazy critics say that about him, right? But he says, no, that's not my argument, right? So it's interesting that he puts that in there because I think he's taking a jab, right? He's like, I know that's bullshit. Like, I'm not, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to embody it through an asshole character to say that, right? Yeah, so you have that moment. And then you get over to Nikki, and the next time you do see Nikki, she's not on the screen, or you see her in actual, and she's like in a red dress, Debbie Harry, right? And I think also, I do think it's really important to say, like, Debbie Harry was like a sex symbol at that time. So I think like in like 83, like people like, it's not just her woman, it's like Blondie, right? Like like that figure being the kind of like you would see through this from, I think is a really, really important thing. She talks about how she has philosophy that we're like kind of overstimulated, right? We live in overstimulated times, but she also speaks about how she likes the overstimulation, that she needs it at times, right? That she has, like, you get this pain, and she's kind of a conflicted kind of character. And then, of course, what does Max start doing? He starts flirting with her. Immediately, like, he calls her out for like wearing a red dress, very like male, like the dude giving the like, well, why are you wearing it? Why are you trying to turn me on then, lady, if you got a problem with stimulation, that type of shit.
And then asks her to dinner.
The flirting and the banter between Max Wren and Nikki Brand continues on the talk show while the host is like, what are you guys doing? And then ends up, that's where she like addresses Brian Oblivion on the camera, who has his stuff doesn't even seem, and this becomes important later, how it doesn't seem like directly connected to it. Like right before he says that line about refusing to appear on television except on television, he's like, the television screen has become the retina of the mind's eye. And he doesn't even address, and then they're flirting in the background while this like quasi-academic lecture is happening with the talking head on TV. It was just a wild scene. And I mean that in a good way too.
Well, the other funny thing is when Oblivion is listening, he doesn't look out into the screen. It's like he's the body. He's like this, watching it like the screen has peripheral vision. It's so good. Like, it's really funny. You're like, what is this, right? And this is where you get Oblivion. And it's probably important at this point to kind of bring in. So Oblivion I think is definitely modeled after Marshall McLuhan. And I don't know if people who do or don't know, McLuhan he's given a lot of different monikers. Like, some people say he's like the father of media studies. So I've heard that. I know his books in media studies courses are still like required for the most part. His very famous kind of quote, "The medium is the message," right? And like McLuhan philosophy, I do think, well, it'll be interesting to talk to y'all about this, because like I think it's embedded in the film, but it's embedded in an interesting way, where I think it's like embedded in a way that also it doesn't disprove McLuhan, but it shows what McLuhan's vision is actually a darkness that if you accepted it, we would all go into a hell zone, right? If we would say, let's take the McLuhan kind of outlook, right, and apply it to like broad society, life would be absolutely warring factions in another externalized sense, where we all basically just die in some kind of fight that we have no control over. But I don't want to, I don't want to go too far on that. But yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything else about McLuhan. Anybody wants to add anything?
I think we should going in because it is an important. I like how the way you brought that up, and it is true. Like, I mean, Cronenberg, like McLuhan influence was immense in academia and at U of T, where, you know, and so Cronenberg had attended some lectures of his, and he definitely is open that he based it on that. But I think there is a little bit, like, it starts up being kind of like that McLuhan figure, but there's more going on because like watching it now, it's like, well, it's been a while since I've read McLuhan. I went back and I have some of his books. Wired released a bunch of them back in the early 90s because it's like Wired, the days of Wired. So I had like The Medium is the Massage, not The Message, where he wrote that one. He played with that, or War and Peace in the Global Village. You know, McLuhan has some interesting stuff about media studies, but I felt there was more in the way that it was being approached, felt more like Guy Debord. And, you know, I'm not always the biggest fan of Guy Debord, but he definitely has more political substance than McLuhan a lot of times, because this notion of the accumulation of images, right? That and you know, like Debord's line about that, which is directly lived becomes representation. We're seeing that. And then also, like, I was thinking when you said this thing about this kind of the vision that McLuhan that would take us to this like very grim place, right? It reminded me of like Stuart Hall had these like kind of criticisms of McLuhan. I mean, because Stuart Hall admits, you know, media studies, McLuhan is important as this foundational scholar, but he critiques him, especially the latter half of McLuhan's writing. He calls it like techno-determinism, right? And he had this line. I had to look it up for this because, like, what was Stuart Hall's line? And his line about the way that McLuhan's work becomes in the latter half of his life. Hall says that, you know, McLuhan was lying back and letting the media establishment roll over him, right? Is kind of and I think maybe that kind of vision of Hall's critique of McLuhan is a way to think about this film and what the film is trying to do when it's talking about kind of this media technology.
Yeah, I mean, Armand Madelart had similar critiques of McLuhan in his book, The Information Society. And, you know, I think it's interesting that, you know, Hall and Madelart, their Marxism, I think, definitely influences it. And we have to also about, like, McLuhan was very much an anti-Marxist in many ways. But yeah, like, I totally agree with you that, like, I feel it does. It's like, because the other, and I read this in an essay about the film. They said the another thing you can't deny within the film is the influence of postmodern politics, because this film is made in the kind of like den of when postmodern politics are, like, you know, really being, you know, written in the early 80s. So, and Cronenberg being an intellectual, well, there's like this. The article suggested things twofold. Cronenberg being an intellectual, he probably was reading tons of different things and like splicing, but also the film does say they think the film also had a lot of purchase on a lot of those thinkers as well, who liked McLuhan, right? But wanted to kind of go past him. So Videodrome also was a kind of thing that like could help them go a little bit past. It could help them think of like new kind of concepts, the kind of externalization of technology and how like the technology kind of works on you. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jay.
No, I mean, so then, I mean,
Well, there's a couple of lines.
Yeah,
I do want to read like a couple of his lines that I think are really interesting. So he's on the TV, and also the actor who plays him, this is great, because they're like, he's like doing this, right? And then he's going, yes, well, let me get it together. So they ask him these questions, and he just speaks like an academic, right? Like, he goes, that's why I never appear on television, except when I'm on television. Of course, Oblivion is not the name I was born with. That's my television name. Soon all of us will have special names designed to cause the cathode ray to resonate, right? And I think like stuff like that is really also very interesting, that like, I think of the internet, I think of social media, everyone having like special names. Like, that's not the name that you're born with. When you get into this sphere, you become another person, right? You're not who you are. You have like another representation later, right? And you kind of get like, you know, inculcated into this like new kind of orientation that but it's also all, I think is the other line is, yeah, the television screen is the retina of the mind's eye. Therefore, the television screen is part of the physical structure of the brain. Therefore, whatever appears on the television screen emerges as raw experience for those who watch it. Therefore, television is reality, and reality is less than television. Right. and you're kind of like getting, but it's like super dense. So you're like, okay. I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, yeah, right. Sure. Like I wasn't able to kind of totally get all of it, but you're kind of like understanding that it's going to be a bit of like a circle until you kind of, which is really what Max's experience throughout the whole film is, to you kind of like find your footing again.
So should we move, like, it kind of goes into their, like, the relationship, right, between Max and what's her
Nikki.
name? Debbie Harry's character, Nikki. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's the sex scene, there's the, showing, basically they're together, right? And she's like, do you have any porno? He has like this box of like tapes on the ground, right? And yeah, she signs it, stimulating or whatever she says, like gets her in the mood basically. And he is like thumbing through and she reaches over and grabs the Videodrome tape. And we should say too, like, I don't think we talked about this really, but this is snuff. Like, this is kind of like what this genre is. And of course, he thinks it's, so broadly speaking, snuff, we should say a little bit about it because it's not as much of a thing anymore, but it's really kind of an urban legend. Like, it's not as though snuff was actually filming people being like killed and, tortured and raped and stuff. It was acted out, right? But it had a legend that it was real, right? And it circulated, often as though you were buying something real. And it had like different phases. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, it would have been kind of in the way that it's shown in this film of like kind of an underground, uh sort of black market commodity to some extent, right? And then even in the internet, I was thinking about this, like in the early phases of the internet. I don't know if either of you remember this, but this was kind of a thing that kids would talk about too, of like, oh, have you seen this? Like there's, kind of like, I mean, I don't even know if it might have been on Napster. Like, I don't really remember ever encountering it, but I remember hearing people talk about it again. And it had this kind of, maybe it was like, what are those things, like MIRC, like the kind of like IRC, like, anyway, like these kind of channels that are sort of like maybe what people would think about as the dark web nowadays to some extent, right? But kind of like outside of the traditional internet that you have, but like person to person sharing of different kinds, right? And so it's interesting in this film because also he believes that it's not real, right? So he believes that it's being acted. Um and we'll get to later on, but eventually he learns that it's supposedly not being acted out, basically. But that kind of touches on the kind of way that there is that urban legend around the stuff as well, that it sometimes is marketed in the kind of informal networks as though this is actually real, which is also wild, right? Because this idea that people would actually want to watch stuff where, like, I mean, it's wild that people would want to watch stuff that where the fantasy is that people are being killed, but it's also wild that they want to watch stuff where people are actually being killed in this kind of way. But she's into it, right? And so then they start having a conversation about it, and he's talking about, oh yeah, I think it's, coming from Malaysia and this and that. I don't think he knows yet the Pittsburgh point, right? That comes later.
The scene right before, actually, Harlan tells him it's in Pittsburgh. Yeah, because then he tells her, and that later kind of propels it. To your point, and I wonder if y'all remember this. The one that I remember growing up was Faces of Death.
I was going to bring that up too.
Yeah, and like, and say more, but like, I remember as a kid, like that being the thing, and like who had a copy of it, right? And right, and I mean, because it was, and that was one of it. Because when I was first introduced to Faces of Death, everyone told me that it was real, right? That it was real, and then I later found out that it wasn't. And I actually don't even know when I've never seen the entire thing, and I don't even know when I actually had ever seen it.
Yeah, I mean, that was the same with me as Faces of Death. And again, it was people were presenting it as if it was real. I never saw the full thing, but I remember it was like in grade 11, end of grade 10, beginning of 11. I had this older friend who was an emancipated minor. He had his own apartment, and I was over at his house. It was also where everyone went to like smoke dope and stuff like that. And this is my the mild drug using days. I was in high school. I was really high there, and someone put that fucking movie on, but saying it was real, and it fucked me up. Right, the scene. I was like, I can't watch this anymore, because even though you look back on it, it's all staged, but when your mind is not seeing it as a horror film, and you're told it's this snuff film that this person is, these are pictures that people have actually dying and stuff, it really does a number on you, especially if you're intoxicated to some level. So yeah, it was years later that I realized it was fake, and I think they're even there's like a remake of it happening soon. It's coming out. With
I think it might actually be.
So.
I think it might be out, but yeah, there's like a new Faces of Death thing, which I saw a glimpse of it, and I just kind of shook my head. I was like, no, come on, man.
I mean, the whole thing.
Are we really gonna do this?
The whole thing was the point was it was a hoax, right? Like that's what makes it interesting historically, even though it's like garbage. But that Faces of Death, the whole snuff, the whole kind of fear, that was like a real thing, right? And I think it's interesting in the films you pointed out that like Max Wren knows that it's not real, because as someone that is working or thinks that it's not real, but has this knowledge that snuff is not real, except for Videodrome, as we'll see. But it's like this. It's this assumption he makes that it's not real right away, because he's probably familiar with this kind of snuff hoax that's going on, as someone in broadcasting would be at that time. And also the Malaysian Pittsburgh thing is interesting, because there is this Orientalism that happened with a lot of snuff films back, maybe not Faces of Death, but this idea that they're all being shot out of third world countries by dodgy, barbaric third world people, torturing and killing people because they're not civilized like the West. And I like how Videodrome plays on that. It assumes right away that it's coming out of the third world, but then you learn, no, it's Pittsburgh, right?
Especially when you find out that Harlan later, like, his manufacturing of a lot of this stuff, it gets really interesting, right? That he says it's from Malaysia first, and right, yeah. So yeah, in a scene before it, Harlan then lets him know that it's in Pittsburgh, right? Which I think is also commenting on like the Northeast, because a lot of the stuff, the pirate stuff was happening in the Northeast, in the US. And then the scene before, what I find, kind of going back to the Nikki stuff, so one of the things that kind of mentioned about her is that she's a radio person, right? And Max like comes to her job, right, to kind of like talk to her, and her show is what is it called? It's called The Emotional Rescue Show. Right, and she's talking to a woman who's like breaking down, right, and she's like getting her. So like, and I think this gets interesting because this has been floated in many people of when we talk about like the hallucinations. Eventually, at what point is Nikki not real? And that's like a really big debate amongst people. And I think it's interesting to think about in the film, because it's interesting to see like what she does. She's like this person who's like, I need all this, like, she needs to be rescued, right? And all this type of stuff. But she's out here rescuing people. So it's like trope, right? Of the person who's the woman who's the rescuer really needs to be rescued, right? So, and then when you see Max kind of like when they're in their kind of like moment together, all their moments together, he gets very paternalistic. So like she wants to do this stuff, and he's like, really, you want to do that? He's like constantly like giving her a warning. And this is the guy who wants to basically give shit to everybody, right? But when he's in this like intimate moment, he suddenly gets, protective and so forth and so on. And he has to like warn, Nikki, like, hey, Nikki, that might be too much for you, right? And then there's like this just gets into a very kind of Cronenberg thing of like kind of like the mutilation of the body, right? Because he sees she has cuts, she has to be cut, right? And they get into this like pleasure play, right, of like pleasure and pain, right? And they begin to have sex, but like intercourse, but like they're also like putting like needles in ears. It gets really, really rough, right? But while she
burns herself first with a cigarette before that, right? Like,
no, I think that's in the next scene.
Oh, the next scene.
In the next sequence, yeah, in the next sequence, right? And then because then you see them when they watch Videodrome, and she also says that like watching stuff turns her on. So the idea of the external, right, is actually what stimulates her her senses, right? So she needs this stimulus to kind of get excited. So when they do go to like full on sex, like they're like I would say Max is imagining himself doing it inside the Videodrome, and like they're like in there, and it's really interesting visually because I think it's a film that you have to think about the visuals literally in terms of like Max's subjectivity, right? Because then the film really kind of goes there, right? So if it's his subjectivity, you have to understand, like, wonder what the expression is saying. Is it saying something that's actual, or is it his like projected desires, or is it something even worse or more scary of this new externalized kind of existence that he's going to go into?
Yeah, I think that the scene where they're suddenly in the Videodrome, that sex scene, which makes sex utterly creepy because they're in that room with the pillars and the fucking clay wall and all that stuff, like the torture place. It's like, there's always go back and forth. Is this something he's imagining, or is it something that's happening? Because that film is constantly playing with that kind of breakdown between this kind of new video reality and what's taken as life, right? Because that line, you quoted it earlier about television is reality and reality is less than television, right? And this, I think that's the first kind of breach of space you see between the two things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting on the level of like, there is this whole discussion about television and reality and the kind of blending of the two. And I think about things like dreams too, right? And how like your own dreams very often will mix in like elements of your own life with stuff that you've seen, right? Whether it's movies, TV, stuff on the internet, and so on and so forth, right? And it's like that breakdown within, just even as that represents within your brain, right? Of like that your brain can present something to you that's a mix of these two things that you can't really tell in the moment whether it's real or not, right? And I think there's just an interesting discussion around consciousness and the influence of these different things within it. The only thing, I don't know if we mentioned it, but she does tell him first to like cut her with a pocket knife, and then shows all of these scars that she has on her neck. And he's like, you really let somebody cut you like that, right? So that's part of it too. So obviously there's the whole like kind of BDSM, aspect of their relationship too.
But he's also like he's not cool with it at the beginning too. He just does it because she wants. He's supposed to be the hardcore guy, right? That pirates this stuff. But she in public is like challenging him. But like in that space, she's like, he's kind of like, all that stuff is like kind of just weak ass for him, because he's like, he gets jealous that someone else was cutting her. She's like, yeah, my friend did this to me, or like whatever. And then it's and then of course the whole thing with Videodrome later on too.
Yeah, and this is where I also question where his hallucinations have started. Personally, I really do question it, because the way that she's even played, she's just like, her responses are so like, yeah, like she's not. There's not a reality to it. But yeah, we'll dig into it. So after this, like, Max goes back to work, and there's a way that also he's looking more deteriorated, right? Like, like he has like his kind of like his being feels like a bit more like drained. And there's like this other person that he knows named Masha. She's like an older woman, and she like sells stuff, and like she becomes important. So she tries to sell him like another kind of like, film. And the other thing, I did want to mention this. I do think also people have to also, because it's not talked about as much unless you're in certain kind of film circles, there also was a kind of softcore porn art industry heavily in the 70s. And I think by the 80s, it was kind of out of fashion. And I think Masha's character is supposed to reference that kind of person who was doing it. I actually saw I forget the name. There was actually a really good documentary that I saw short about a guy who lives in a retirement community, right? In like North Carolina. And he tells everybody that he was basically a film teacher, but when they find out he was actually a softcore porn like director in the 70s in New York, it's actually really funny, right? And it's made by his nephew, right? Who didn't know until he went to film school. And then, and then the mom had to tell him, like, yeah, you know, your uncle made films. What kind of films? Go ask him, you know? It's like it's really funny. But yeah, there is that kind of culture, and I think Masha kind of represents that. And she tries to sell this series, and it's like Dionysus, and they're like, you know, it's like, I mean, it looks really corny. She's trying to sell him this stuff, and he doesn't really want it. And but he tells her, like, yo, but there is something that I want if you can go find it. What? He's like, Videodrome. I'm trying to hunt down these Videodrome cats, right? Can you go? And she's like, yeah, I'll go do it, you know, and she very reluctantly, you know, to go, you know, to make it happen. And this is where you get to like the next scene with Nikki. And this is where she tells him that she's gonna go to Pittsburgh and she's gonna audition for Videodrome. Which then sends like Max into a complete tailspin.
It's interesting. Do you like at this point, because doesn't Max sort of insinuate like even though he sort of thinks it's not real, like maybe it is, or that like, you know, I don't know if he's been told that at this point. I can't remember, but
No,
I think
not
it's just
yet.
sort of like it seems too realistic for him to be like, I don't know if you want to go audition for that. Like, that looks
Well, he
rough.
has this line. He goes, "I want you to stay away from it. Those Mondo weirdo video guys, they've got unsavory connections. They play rougher than even Nikki Brand wants to play. You know, in Brazil, Central America, those kinds of places, making underground videos is considered a subversive act. They execute people for it. Pittsburgh, who knows?" Like, right? So there is this kind of like, you know, sense that he has, but I think also it is like the paternalism, like really playing that, like, I'm now into this woman and I'm gonna, like, you know, let her know that she's too stupid to kind of know what she's doing.
Anything you want to add, JMP?
No, I think that was like I was gonna kind of say similar things, but I didn't have the quote in front of me, so that quote was great.
Yeah. So next, so there's the point about it having a philosophy, right? Like, do we want to talk about that at all? Like the
Well, is that, I mean, when that line comes up, is that like after his first trip to the Cathode Street mission? Or does he go to that? It's before? I can't, you're muted, so I can't.
I'm sorry. She sends him there from this meeting. So Masha,
Oh yeah, that's right, because that's when she learns out that one clue. Yeah, so we should go into that scene. Because also that scene is shot in this restaurant that still exists, which is this, like, remember the belly dancing that's happening down below on the restaurant? It's like this Middle Eastern restaurant that has that kind of self-orientalizing or like for the people, like, there still is belly dancers there. And I can't remember what the hell, it's got a name that's like, I knew at the time because it still exists in that way. So it was kind of funny to see it in there because it's like one of those places that tourists go to and things like that.
Oh, that's interesting. That's funny. Yeah. Yeah. So in that sequence, Masha comments on like how bad Max looks, and I think that's actually really important. And yeah, and Masha basically warns Max about pursuing Videodrome, and Jay brought it up. She says to Max, and I think people can unpack this, you know, that Videodrome has what he doesn't. And he's like, well, what's that? He says, a philosophy.
I think she also says it's dangerous because it has a philosophy, right?
Yeah, right.
And then he says, whose philosophy? That's
yeah, and I think that's just an interesting comment because I think I personally took it as, and maybe even Cronenberg making a self comment about where kind of independent, like subversive art has gone, right? That like a lot of it is just for the shock treatment, right? But no, now you stepping into a spot of philosophy. You know, like there's like another there's another gear, bro, right? And also shout out to Masha. There's like this sequence where like he basically like Max tries to like, you know, flirt with her and says, you know, I'll let you like, you know, get freaky with me. She basically was like, yeah, you're a little old for me for my tastes. And she looks at the waiter.
Yeah, that scene where she looks over at that like waiter and he like smiles at her and stuff. That was great.
She's like, please, bro, you don't have it.
I also think it's like the philosophy thing. It's like it's one of those things. It's like, you know, when I was younger and watching it now, it's like how much is Cronenberg like aware of like a lot of it is kind of like how much is this posing and stuff. But I read his novel, his 2015 novel, and it's all about these French philosophers, right? And it's all body horror as well. Like one of them is found dismembered and half eaten, but like in it he's like just talking about like existentialism and Althusser and things like that. So he actually is like really well when he talks about philosophy. As you pointed out earlier, he was probably reading all the stuff that was big at the time when he was working on this. But it's not going to work as well in a movie to do that kind of. But like having these kind of references, and it's dangerous because it has a philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also like maybe more than anything, it's kind of a critique of Max as well, right? Of just like you said, Mtume, like Max is just looking for shock. He's just looking for like what is going to like attract people, like what is going to get those viewers tuned in and stuck to the thing. And he doesn't really care, I don't think at all, like what it is, right? He's just looking for that. Whereas the Videodrome is presented as there's something nefarious going on, but they also know what they're doing. There's something intentional about it, right? Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting.
Doesn't she use the word political, or like it's more political? Doesn't she say that?
I can't remember, but it does become clear that it's that.
Yeah,
like,
I think she does say that, like it's more political or something like that, when like he's trying to basically like grab it out of her, right? And
she references politics for sure. I'm not sure if she says it's a political philosophy, but she does reference politics.
Yeah, like it's more political, like or something than you know, and so basically this leads you to where she brings up Brian Oblivion, right? So he gets kind of thrown back into the mix, and we're now back into the world of Oblivion. And that next shot I love. We get and people can jump in, like, so basically he goes to this mission, and it's the cathode, it's a cathode ray mission.
Cathode,
and, but what's hilarious, they look like zombies. Like he's like, and Max looks like one of them. There's like a bunch of like homeless people, right? And like Max got to stick up, and he looks like a junkie. right, and he walks into this mission. Like if you didn't know that he was a different character, you'd be like, who the hell? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and they walk into this place, into the cathode ray mission, and you see, is there like an eye? I can't remember there's like a picture in it. I can't remember what it is, but yeah, there's like a definitely like interesting like image to kind of show. And people who don't, maybe should we explain what that is actually for people who don't know? Anybody want to give it a stab? Or
what, a cathode ray?
Yeah. Oh, I have it here. I don't know if it's like it's supposed to be like high speed electrons, right? And it comes through like the vacuum tube, right? Which is like how television is. It's partly how it was part of how television was actually invented to be transmitted, right? And vacuum tubes and like old analog technology, compression. This is where I don't really know, but I know it's like it's essential to that kind of like electrical, you know, connections and creations.
It's like the pre-digital TV technology, right?
Yeah.
And the mission itself, right, is to like help homeless people, right, by immersing them in television. Isn't that the idea of the cathode ray mission?
Yeah, like you don't know what it is. You walk in and you see all these homeless folks like watching TV. You're like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, it's all those separate kind of like areas where, but it's almost like this weird prefiguration of like a lot of public libraries now in Toronto have now these separate stalls where people can just go on and get on the internet, right? And it's
Yeah.
like that, but it's like TV, because I mean, the TV technology that they're imagining here is becoming almost interactive, right? And it's like there's a line that, you know, it's about like plugging people back into the world's mixing board is like the term that's used by Oblivion's daughter, right? Bianca Oblivion. She talks about this as like almost like this, people need to be plugged into the world's, and TV is like this like way to like heal them, right? It's like this I don't know, it's a kind of weird video therapy that's happening in there.
Yeah, like, so because he goes looking for Brian Oblivion, and he basically meets the daughter, right? And the daughter's there, and like it's kind of mysterious and whatnot, and like she takes him upstairs, right? And they begin having this conversation, and she's kind of like her dad, like she like speaks in these like rhetorical kind of like phrases, not as long, right? Because she actually has a great line about what her dad's preferred communication now is the monologue. I love that. It's his preferred form of discourse, right? But yeah, she'll say things like, he'll ask a question. She goes, "I am my father's screen." Like it's like she plays it so good. Go ahead.
I think that line was great because a double meaning of screen, right? So it's about television screens, but there's also the screen that the father is behind, right? You know.
Right, and because he's trying, Max is like, Videodrome is through here, but he doesn't not quite know like what Videodrome has to do with this, right? And he's trying to kind of like, you know, poke in, and he finds out about what her project is, right? About what she says, like plugging him back into the mixing board, right? But then he leaves her with Videodrome, right? He says, "Tell the dad, you know, Videodrome and hit me back," you know, and then he leaves, right? Um, and he goes back to his apartment where he's then met by his assistant, which is another interesting scene because his assistant comes in, the one who you see at the beginning, to give him his evening tape, right? But then he goes into this thing where he basically like he slaps her, he slaps her, right? And he has this thing, and she's like she's like not responsive, and then he apologizes, but then he realized, she says, "Well, you didn't do anything to me." Right? So now he's having these like other kinds of hallucinations, and you're beginning to see that like the reality that we see of Max, we actually can't trust.
Yeah, also, before we get into this, I think the Cathode Street mission thing. One thing that I found interesting too, but like when he meets Bianca Oblivion in the office, like the top office, it's like they go from like kind of the video techno world to this office that is like pre-modern. It's like it's filled with antiques and relics. There's nothing actually technological within the office itself, right? It's this strange kind of it's the juxtaposition is really wild. Like it's something that's opulent Renaissance art and artifacts, right? Like it was just right from the scene also of poverty and video to like pre-modern wealth. Right?
But then there is a video cassette camera like pointing right at the desk, right? So it's like all of that opulence, but then the video camera, right? And you're like, okay, interesting, right? So he gets into this, he does that, the assistant leaves, he's like kind of more worried about him. And this is where like the film, I think, begins to like kind of hit like a new shift, right? Because then she says, "Oh, here's a tape from Oblivion," right? And in like classic Cronenberg fashion, you know, like the tape starts like pulsating. Which is just like, I remember when I first saw this, I was like, "Oh, what the hell is going on here?" Right? The tape is like pulsating, and like it's, and what's really interesting about the design is it's shout out to Rick. Yeah, so Rick Baker was the lead designer on this for like these type of things, and he was probably at the time most famous for American Werewolf in London. That was like his big thing at the time, though he worked on a lot of stuff, like even like where he wasn't like lead credit. Like he worked on one of the, I think he did stuff on the first Star Wars. Like Rick Baker's on a lot. If you look through his like listing of stuff, Rick Baker was like he was a big dude in a lot of things. But this was like, you know, so but this design was definitely a big part of it. Apparently he had more that he was going to do, but the budget kept getting, there's like a famous scene that's supposed to have happened of where Nikki and Max are supposed to like blend into one creature, but they said, yeah, we can't afford that. So they had to cut it.
He also, I just as a reference point, because I went down this rabbit hole this week. If anybody ever went to Disneyland in like the late 80s or early 90s and saw the Michael Jackson 3D movie Captain EO, that's all Rick Baker. So.
That I didn't know. Wow.
Yeah, wow. I never saw it in person. But I remember Captain EO being advertised.
It's you can find it on YouTube now. Obviously, it's weird because it was 3D, and so it's like now 2D, and so it's kind of like blurry and stuff like that. But it's there. It's like it has like a Jim Henson, Star Wars, Michael Jackson vibe all together. So
I've never seen it. I've always wanted to see it. I maybe we should just watch it. I need to just watch it at some point. Yeah. I mean, Moonwalker, which we talked about, probably we should be doing, but at some point. But yeah, Captain EO, I never saw, but I always wanted to. Anybody
he
have
also
any
did
comments
like
on this?
he did like Thriller and stuff like that too. So like other
that's what I mean. Like his listing is insane. Like Rick Baker is a legend, right? And yeah, he may not always be the first name, but he's one of these people you find out did this. He was part of this department on this film, this department, right? Like big deal. But yeah, the scene keeps going on. If anybody wants to add, I mean, because then he begins to watch the tape from Oblivion. Anybody want to jump in on the stuff that you see from this sequence?
Well, I think that the tape is great because it goes back to like, but he in the tape he addresses Max, right? And I think that's when he starts. Is it in the tape that he actually talks about what Videodrome is, right?
Yeah.
Oh! For our earlier comment about when she says politics, she does say I found in my notes. She does say that Masha does say Videodrome is political. She like literally, but it's not. I mean, it's clear that it's actually very like in a very like concrete way. It's political, but is it like because he thinks he has that line. He has that line about like in that video that the battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena, the Videodrome, right? And is that the line? Is it there that he talks about the cancer, about having the cancer? Or
so it's
tumor?
right. Yeah, it's right after, because the very first thing he basically says is that he was Videodrome's first victim.
Yeah.
So this is where you actually see, and it's not necessarily a reenactment, but you do see an enactment of basically Oblivion getting killed right on screen. Right. And whether or not this is a direct representation of the tape or not, so forth and so on, is like up to kind of judgment. But Max watches this, right? This sequence, right?
And it's Brand that kills him, isn't it? Like in the video, it's Nikki Brand that kills Brian.
You find it out eventually, yeah, later when she takes off the hood. Yeah. You don't know at first, right? It's like a hooded kind of thing. It's very like gothic, almost like, kind of like old, like, like come in and like kill him on like this screen, right? And then he says about the brain tumor and that he felt the visions were becoming flesh.
Yeah, he kind of it's almost like he talks about the tumor being like a new organ, right? That's like created by the video. That he helps pioneer and work on this Videodrome technology. But then there's, as we learn, or I don't know how far we learn, there's that kind of like the people he's with have like they've had a parting of ways, right?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, there was like, I don't know if you experienced this, JMP, but I remember in the 80s and in the early 90s, like all of this kind of, I even remember my parents saying, don't sit too close to the television because it's going to give you cancer. Like I actually remember this kind of remark. And I haven't studied that, so maybe that's actually a thing, and I don't know. But there is certain levels, and this is like the cathode ray and all of this. There are certain levels of radiation. It's also connected to UHF channels that are related to this technology, right? And I think that people were worried about it and didn't know kind of what it would cause, right? And so there's a way, I think, that it's kind of combining, this discussion also it connects also to the idea of sort of body horror or whatever, right? Of just that there's the kind of psychological, social effects of this thing, but also this idea that it really can actually, produce kind of a horror in your body or something that, and I mean, that's very interesting within the film. And you all mentioned like the pulsating tape, but eventually we get to pulsating TVs and all this kind of stuff. Um, of this idea of all of this stuff kind of taking on a flesh like and that kind of taking the horror of it to a different level.
Yeah, I mean, it's the I can't remember if it was when he watches that, and again, it's like what you were saying about like kind of the fear that TVs would give you cancer. It's like it's literalized here, where it's almost like Videodrome can give people things. We learned what else it can do a bit later, but was it when he was watching that, or when he was watching something else, the scene where he has the gun? Where does that come out? Because I think the gun is before his meeting with Spectacular Optical, or maybe I'm getting the order wrong.
It is. So in the next sequence, he buys a gun right before that, and you see that he like is unwrapping a gun. But to get to that, stay with the tumor thing. So one thing I did read that Cronenberg said was that at the time, you're right, like that was a lot of people didn't know about the technology. So there was like this kind of questions of, would the technology eventually like deteriorate us? And that's part of like Cronenberg's like interests, right? Trying to blend the kind of like social kind of deterioration that could have, the psychosocial, with also an actual physical manifestation. So when like not McLuhan, though the other thing I'll bring up about McLuhan and says why he's in my head about this, but with Oblivion, he's trying to say that like they are kind of like connected. So in that connection, he says like the tumor became actualized. Was when they cut it out, it was Videodrome, right? Like, so like basically these things externalize and they're actually like now a real tangible thing. So like cancerous tumors are basically the outgrowths of like a new thing in society that we have to contend with and wrestle with, right? So like it's really interesting, but Cronenberg did say that was part of the thought. Like no one had any idea, right? And I think he's questioning especially when we learn about Spectacular Optical later in the film, like how could we trust? Like we don't know who these people are who are making this shit, right? Like they're making stuff. Who says they don't? They're not trying to like do something weird and transform our bodies, right? So he's like kind of like implanting that kind of seed of like there might be this thing and it's going to externalize into like a new formation of existence to kind of wrestle with.
Right on. I'm contributing to the Captain EO discourse in the chat, but to just Samantha Yusuf's comment, it was a very Orientalist film actually. That
Really?
Michael,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like deeply, for sure. But anyway,
Captain EO was.
Yeah. The woman at the end, like if you could rewatch it. I won't get into it because we're sidetracked into another discussion, but absolutely Orientalist. All right. So from here, where do we want to go next?
So yeah, we should talk about the gun part. Yeah. So like he basically goes and like Max is starting to get like paranoid, right? And yeah, I mean there's also like this, there's the other sequence before that where like the TV, like it's really great design, right? Like it starts like pulsating, right? And you see like Nikki Brand's lips on the screen and they poke out. I mean, it's so good, man, how they did it, right? It's so cool. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean that the TV coming alive, it's just definitely so fucking creepy, right?
Like, and he goes into it.
Yeah, like, he goes in to kiss these giant lips as he's like caressing the TV. It's like this techno fetishism happening there.
Yeah, it's so cool, man. Like I it's one of the best design sequences I think I've ever seen in the film. It's really, 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 really great. And then yeah, he goes back to Bianca Oblivion, right, first, right, and tells her about the tape. And he's like, oh yeah, this is this is heavy, right? This is some real shit you just gave me, right? And I forgot what she tells him. Yeah, she says, yeah, that Videodrome, like it broadcasts a signal, right? And basically it gives tumors. And Oblivion found out later that it was used for these like purposes, and basically got into kind of like a war with them. And then he got killed by his own invention, right? So she shows him essentially that her dad is in fact dead, and basically he lives on video cassettes. And there's like this like massive room of fucking video cassettes, right? So everything, so it's fat. It's fat. I think you think about it on two levels, right? Like, yes, because it used to confuse me when I was like younger. I didn't really get it, but what I realized was if you're already suffering from a hallucination and also this kind of video cassette, you're basically gonna get your own kind of interpretation. So this hallucinatory society watching a pre-planned thing, it'll all kind of like go into a weird like mix of like psychosis or hallucinations externalized.
But also, I think what's interesting with that scene now, where she shows him the archive, that this is my dad, right? He's just this massive video archive. It's like this weird, like reading it now, when we think about like LLMs, like this AI bullshit, like it's like this video version of an LLM, right? Where he can be mixed together, but it requires analog kind of mixing. He can be mixed together to like basically be alive with these kind of things that he's just an archive, right? He's an archive that is like in a way this kind of shitty AI, but a video version of it, right? And I found that kind of really interesting about this kind of like, yeah, that's this like Brian Oblivion is like the video future, analog future that we never got version of like AI. It's like what he is, and but yeah, also the like this when Bianca kind of started the conspiracy that's going on, right? And you know that these video screens now are like can give tumors and hallucinations, and you know we get to see how far it goes with that. It's like there is that long-standing Cronenberg kind of obsession with like paranoid conspiracy theories, right? That sometimes takes on a quasi-political. I mean, Cronenberg's a progressive of a certain type. He's not like a revolutionary communist or anything like that. But I mean, it's definitely, it always kind of appears in his work of this kind of world of like kind of imperialist or weapons manufacturing conspiracies that he never ekes out. It appears in Naked Lunch too in a weird way, but it appears also in The Shrouds, his most recent one, with this kind of the technology. There's this, but he never actually works out what the conspiracy is. And I remember him saying, because people complain about his work, as well, he'll sometimes say, like, I mean, Videodrome is very clear at some, like, we'll get to there, but like it's still like the whole way that even the other conspiratorial factions function, it's not like worked out in this clear, like hard sci-fi kind of way, right? I mean, and I know he said in this interview that he goes, well, if you speak to people that believe in conspiracy theories, they need it not to be solved fully. Like they need this kind of thing to keep going down like a drug down this rabbit hole, right? As he tries to represent that paranoid mind. And I think it's like the 80s Cold War when this take place, and it's like that height of kind of the paranoid agent. He does a really good job with that, with this kind of conspiracy, but also predicting a technology that we never got, right? But weirdly resembles kind of like the World Wide Web before it was invented, but in different ways, like this world switchboard, LLMs that's like archive, right? TVs that can communicate to you and like kind of almost be your own kind of like social media kind of ways, right? It was very, very interesting.
Yeah, totally. And there's a whole other element. I'm gonna save it a little bit, but when we get to the spectacular optical, it's just a hilarious, like,
Yeah.
thing that they do with that. But do we get now to the point where he like has the body cavity start to
Yeah.
develop, right? And
Yeah.
obviously this is represented as vagina like, and he takes the pistol and like is like scratching an itch basically inside, and you can tell that it's like somewhat pleasurable for him, and then like the gun is just sort of eaten into him basically.
Yeah.
I don't know, anything else we want to add on that, or yeah, go ahead. Are you muted? You accidentally muted yourself? Let's see, can I unmute you? Nope. All right. You unplugged some. Your mic probably died on you.
Well, this filled the space then. I mean, yeah, that was, we were talking earlier about the practical effects. I think those were really great practical effects of the body kind of opening up. And the way that that's actually, I know Mtume talked about kind of the economy of the film. I mean, it's all in 88 minutes, but the way that even that is not just a one-off scene, that kind of that gap that opens up in him that he puts the gun in and then closes up, that becomes like really important later on as well, right? We've hope his mic is fixed.
I'm sure he'll get back in a minute. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, there's some good stuff. The chat has also had a lot of good comments too that we could probably speak to for just so we get back on track a little bit. Steven was talking about, was this part of the broader subliminal message scare of the time too, like records playing backward and all that type of shit. Like that was a really interesting element in this period where, people would say if you played certain like Beatles or Beach Boys records back, like you would get messages from Satan and all of this kind of stuff. This was
it was that same period of the satanic panic and everything. I mean, I think maybe like the whole height of the satanic panic came a little bit later, but it definitely was. Pretty sure it was there in 83, but I remember it more when I was older, but it doesn't mean that, I mean, I can't really remember things like that when I was 5, but definitely was there.
I think even, I'd have to delve into this more deeply, but I think even with Charles Manson, like some of that stuff started to circulate related to, him and his cult basically, but yeah. But go ahead, Mtume, are you back?
Yeah, my bad. Yeah, I had a weird computer glitch. That was very strange. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that is you get to what Josh was kind of talking about, where he talks about that oblivion, that I believe that the growth in my head, this one right here, I think that is not really a tumor, not an uncontrolled, undirected little bulging part of flesh, but that it is, in fact, a new organ, a new part of the brain. I think that massive doses of Videodrome signal will ultimately create a new outgrowth of the human brain, which will produce it and control hallucination to the point that it will change human reality. After all, there is nothing outside of our perception of reality is there. You can see that, can't you? Right? So this is like, to me, I mean, I think when we get to the end of film, we can like discuss it more, because this is where my thing with the film I've always felt is, I said, this film feels about like two warring factions that, like, yeah, if I'm kind of forced to root for one in this moment, I'll root for Oblivion. But yeah, this shit ain't good either. Right? Like, I'm like, it's like,
I was gonna say, it's like the, as we'll see with Spectacular Optical, which is more monstrous in a real world kind of way, but like the sci-fi vision that Oblivion has is also seen. I think Cronenberg also presents it as terrifying. The idea that you have the new flesh of outgrowth of organs and almost being inserted in, like what we later say, like, with the movies like The Matrix, being inserted into some virtual reality. Where you're like completely shorn from the body, right? Which is like a bizarre, like, the idea where representation becomes reality. You're like living in the bottom of Plato's cave or something like that is almost like what Oblivion and them want, the world switchboard. But it's like, but yeah, I mean, it's, in some ways it seems marginally better, but it's like, it's just these competing paranoid conspiracies are going on, and one conspiracy lost to the other.
Yeah, it's like, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it makes me think also of like people like Peter Thiel, right? And when they go on like their weird, like transhumanist kind of rants, right? Of like, we will adapt technology into our bodies and become more than human kind of thing. And I do think there's certain ways, and we'll talk about it as we get to the end, where like Cronenberg is representing different sort of arguments or factions within kind of ruling class, ideas right here of like how should society evolve in certain ways, right?
Yeah, and like, to bring back in McLuhan real quick, I think it was War and Peace. I was reading one of McLuhan's books last year, one that I had a really negative reaction to. I had never read it before. And in it, there's like these suggestions of that kind of world, right? But what I always struggled with McLuhan was I felt that his whole thing was that we kind of that one, right? And it's that yeah, and like McLuhan was kind of almost like you kind of have to accept that that's the new reality, right? And that like the new reality will be this techno war, right? And that is society. And I remember reading it just being like, and then like on top of that, and his little like anti-Marxist like pop shots that he always throws in his books that are like weird non sequiturs, and I'm always like, I can't read this shit, right? But so when I get back to this, I'm always like, long live the new flesh. Damn, this is like not, I'm rooting for you, but not really. This kind of sucks, right? This reality actually is really trash. But I think Cronenberg is kind of like, because it is that period of a kind of dark early 80s also. And I think it was that new class of like socially kind of intelligent filmmakers weren't part of political projects, so they saw everything as like really dark, right? And this like really dark kind of like happening, right? So yeah, he puts like the gun in his chest, and then I think this is when he gets the phone call, right? He gets the phone call from Mr. Barry Convex, who's like an
Yeah,
all-time villain.
Yeah, so he gets invited by Barry Convex to visit Spectacular Optical, which is now a low budget weed store. But
Value buds, right?
Value buds, yeah. Hey, we could use some of those around here. But anyway, no, but so I just found this hilarious. It's a eyeglass company that don't they say they make eyeglasses for like third world people, basically, like for like impoverished people in the third world, and they sell weapons to NATO.
It's great.
I love that. It's like the front is like, we make these cheap glasses, but we're also this like arms dealer for NATO. They're weapons, not just arms dealer, but arms creator, right?
And he says they also make Videodrome, which then like immediately should just situate you in like, oh shit, this is, oh, wait a minute. Oh, hold up. NATO, Videodrome, what's happening? And then when Masha said about politics, you're like, oh, okay. You know, now I know what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, now the philosophy starts to sound a lot more like Peter Thiel.
Right.
Well, yeah, it's like this thing where he said it was political. It's not like political philosophy. There's like actual political investment in the arms trade and arms manufacturing for NATO.
Yeah. So Max goes, and he's like in a limo, and he goes and he meets Convex. And I think it's always so interesting that you meet people versed by their video. Because the first time he actually sees Convex, it's via like a video conference thing in a limousine, right? And he comes in to Spectacular Optical, right? And he has this big like head device that he gives Max to basically put on. It's like our new thing we're working on, and it's to basically to record Max's hallucinations, right? So, side note, people said this is like a very interesting thing because this was before virtual reality was like a popularized kind of thing. So like a lot of people give Cronenberg credit for thinking about it. I don't know if I've ever heard him comment on how he came about it. I'm sure he has in like director commentary. I would be very curious to know like what he was referencing or thinking about or anything when he made it, right? And you see him basically put on, and like, this thing is like huge. It's like a really weird looking thing on his head, right? And he begins to like have these visions of Nikki, and he's on set, like he's like whipping Nikki on the Videodrome set. And I think, but then she eventually turns into Masha, right? And it's
And
like,
isn't he whipping the TV, and she's on the
Yeah,
TV, but the
like
TV is fleshy and she can feel it? Like,
the
yeah.
TV's facing us, and it's like he's behind whipping it, right?
yeah, and it's like it's wild. It's like they're kind of playing with what Oblivion is talking about, you know, like revisualizing it, which I think a lot of what he does, if Oblivion says something, Cronenberg like wants to like give you like the visual representation. So it's kind of like then like experientially given to you, what you're seeing visually. Right. And then he gets back, he's back home, and then he sees basically like Masha and dead in his bed. Right. So you're like, oh snap, we killed Masha. What's going on? And he asks Harlan to come over, and then Harlan comes over and he's like, go look in the room. And then Harlan comes over, looks in the room, and he's like, what you talking about? Right. So the idea that the hallucinations are still happening.
I want to say before that, going back to the apparatus, which is kind of
Yeah.
a vision that people had for a long time of what VR would be like. And as you pointed out, maybe he's the one that invented this conception. But I also remember kind of in the 90s, at least, they created these VR games, which, and they had fucking apparatuses like that. But also, I think the way that he goes into this kind of thing that's supposed to spectacular optical is saying, because I mean, they tell him that he's like gotten sick from the signal, but he wasn't supposed to get it, right? This is what they tell him to get him to put this on. And he's so dumb. He's like, he puts it on from people just admit that they like make weapons for NATO, right? And it's like they have this glasses front. It's like so he's down in this like conspiracy place. They give him a tech. And we're like, we're trying to help you. Like, really? But then it's like because they say, yeah, he's got this. He accidentally got the Videodrome broadcast, right? Like, that's what they tell him. And then, but I thought the way that it goes into this supposedly therapeutic thing they're giving him, it's like this pixelated. Like, it's like that. It's like, it's all this. And then suddenly it resolves into an image, but you see that kind of old school, like early, like not high resolution of the squares that like started to resolve into an image, which is also kind of the way that people were looking at that period of time at scramble porn too, right? This kind of notion of scramble porn on TV that those broadcasts, those UHF broadcasts really played into as well, but catching kind of scramble porn stuff.
Yeah, the only other thing I can think of related to that device is sort of in the like what's his name? Kubrick kind of realm, of some of his stuff with particularly Clockwork Orange, right? But also kind of discussions about MK Ultra, right? And this idea of like making people watch certain types of visuals, right, while giving them drugs and all of this stuff. That there was that, that was also something I think that would have been kind of in his consciousness, because it was definitely out there and talked about. And by this time, the revelations of MK Ultra officially come about in like 75 or 76. So that would be another element of it as well. But yeah.
So then like the big kind of next big thing is, so when Harlan leaves and he's like, meet me back at my office, right? And all that, we're going to figure this out. Max goes back to the office and he meets Harlan. And Harlan pretty much reveals that basically what's been happening, there's been more happening to Max than Max actually realizes. So that Harlan essentially didn't get some kind of feed. He works with convex. He actually works with spectacular optical, right? And they've purposely been giving Max the feed, right? So basically showing it to him, because the big question that Max has is, well, if I've been getting sick and getting like a tumor, why hasn't this been happening to Harlan? Because he's watched it as well, right? So Max being, I mean, the other thing about Max is that he's, for all this, like, shrewd businessman, he is kind of dumb, right? And he's easily like led, which I think is like really, 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 I think, important in the film, right? To kind of make like, they can kind of push him. He's a tool, right? And that's like the other part of it. He's a tool for spectacular optical. He becomes a tool for the Oblivions, right? He's basically really easily, pushed if you just basically stimulate him or kind of play upon his like his very simplistic hangups or wants, right? And there's this line by Harlan that I think is really, really good. I think I know what I'm talking about, right? So Harlan has this line because he's trying to say, like, why are we doing this? And he goes, North America is getting soft Patron and the rest of the world is getting tough. Very, very tough. We're entering savage new times, and we're going to have to be pure and direct and strong if we're going to survive them. Now, you in this cesspool, you call a television station, and your people who allow around it in it and your viewers, watch what you do it. You're rotting us away from the inside. We intend to stop that rot. Some of that is convex also. It's actually both of them, right? So I'd be curious what y'all thought about that, because there is this way where they kind of like shit on Max, right? They're saying you are this like smut peddler, right? And this and this and that. And like, it's like a very conservative ideology. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like thinking of like Reagan, 80s. I actually don't know where Canada was politically at that time. I'd be very curious to kind of get a comment on that. But I found it like that kind of hard line of conservatism and like the softness of the public really interesting.
Yeah, I'll just add because I want JMP to respond, but I was curious about the Canada element of that. Obviously, coming, because I mean, yes, the United States is going through a similar kind of thing, as we've talked about a lot on this series of, we need to, revalorize and become, heroes again and engage in wars and, all of this stuff to kind of try to get imperialism back on solid footing after Vietnam. But I'm curious too, because Canada obviously has this kind of softer, foreign policy historically, right? And whether that is a vein of thought also within Canada among certain sectors of like, actually, we need to be more forceful on the, in this kind of way. But yeah, I was curious about all of that.
Yeah, I mean, Canada at the time was, I mean, it was Trudeau Senior, his second time, because he left and then came back later on. So his second time, I mean, and then Trudeau Senior is famous for like being supposed, like people see him as like, oh, he's such a progressive, but the Liberal Party was always the like kind of right centrist party in Canada. It's even more so now, but I mean, but he did have this thing where he was into social reforms, but there was also like, he was like really tough. Like he declared the state of emergency on the FLQ in during his period of time. But I think also like it is the Reagan era kind of argument, because I think there was a lot of fascination in Canada with that. Like after Trudeau, we get like Brian Mulroney, who's a conservative government, just a year after this movie aired, right? And so there was like this resurgence of like a conservatism about being tough in the Cold War, being, I think a lot of like anti-Soviet stuff being like much more pronounced this period of time. And that the fascinating kind of that reactionary group of the ruling class having a lot more interest. I mean, they become more reactionary now, but back then the kind of more that kind of Reagan, that like of Reagan, right? So it's like this idea of moral rot became really big in Canada as well, but it came from all this kind of American culture stuff as well. Like I remember growing up that period of time, right? Because I was 5 here, but this discourse in the media of a moral rot in society and a return to family values. It was, of course, reflecting what was happening in Reagan, but then you had the same thing with Thatcher era. And we were, Canada was always close to Britain, so the whole Thatcher stuff would have like really influenced this as well. So I think the argument that he's making is precisely it's that it is the one like Reagan and Thatcher, like this idea when Reagan comes in thinking that in the Cold War that they weren't being tough enough, right? It's like this evil empire discourse. We got to be tough. Everyone else is like getting tough. We're going to be tough again, right? And the moral rot one is interesting because it's such the hypocrisy. I think the movie really shows that hypocrisy. Like they're blaming Max and his viewers for this, but they're the ones putting out the Videodrome broadcast. Like they're actually putting out the moral rot they claim to be combating with it. And it's like, if you really believe this was a moral rot, why are you like just like, it's the same. It's like I feel it's like this echo of the argument Max makes at the beginning. Like Max is like, well, I'm just doing this to give people an outlet. And they're like, we're just doing this to, teach people a lesson because they want it, right?
We're using your own shit against you. See, we got you. Now, now we're going to control you to kind of get you to toughen up, and we're going to put it all over the waves and make sure everybody gets tougher. I mean, it's like the convex when you watch it, like he's in Anne Harlan, and like you can tell their mentalities are like totally, I mean, they're like psychotics. Like they don't have a real kind of read on anything. I mean, and that becomes kind of the film. Like you watch it and you're like, everybody here is lost it, right? like Bianca Oblivion, Brian Oblivion, the Convex, Harlan. Max never really had it. Masha's probably the only smart person in the movie. She's like, yo, look, you can't even trust if Nikki's real. You don't know where Nikki has actually started, right? So you're kind of like, oh my gosh, you're in this like dark web of just like completely morally and like psychologically twisted people by this war over the signal. And that's like the thing, like it's like this war over the broadcast signal. Right, this is like the new like site of struggle in a kind of way.
And don't we get here too that like the plot is to purge, right? Like, so the people who watch it, right, they'll all get tumors basically and die off, right? So like that's part of it, is to like anybody who would want to look at this, like we're gonna get rid of them. Yeah. So, anyways,
or they're operationalized as agents, right? Like this is this thing.
Right.
It's kind of like this precursor to the whole notion of a stochastic agent you have in the net, but it's like this one, it's more direct to like a conspiracy. But it's like they, in the analog way, just like this idea of people being operationalized through some internet discourse. Now it's like they're operationalized through video signals. They can be almost like and directly. In the case of Max Ren, and it is like turned into like a video player, right? Where they can just play a tape on him as programming. And that's where, the mention of earlier, and again, Mtume, you had mentioned the economy of the film in like 88 minutes. Like the gun scene that he inserts, it's not just a throwaway scene. That slit his back, and it's a VHS it's a VHS, like whatever those slots are called, the hardware. They put that fucking tape in him, and it's another squirmy tape, right?
It's like pulsating again, and yeah, and they put it out, and he puts like the Betamax tape in it, right? And basically, this is where you get the kind of concept of like the organic gun. It starts to come about, right? And
the gun comes back out. The gun inside is like comes back out, and like
it comes back out, right? And like this idea that like the tape, and like, I mean, this is like also, I just think, really good filmmaking, like. Bad like movies like this will just like say a line, right? And like have a big like explosion. Like the fact that Cronenberg took the time to like actually like physicalize the actual thing, like the tape, and it like it really becomes visceral. You're like, oh my God, it's like really going in me, right? So the big thing is they tell him basically to Max that he has to go kill his partners at Civic TV, right? So he basically has to go, and he goes back, and like. And it's interesting, whenever I watch this scene, I always think of like these like, stories of like murders, of like, office murders. Guy came in and killed his business partners, and and you see it. You see he rolls up in there, and like he does it, like, and they're like, and their reactions are really interesting. That's like the other part of it, is like, because you also don't know about what's a hallucination or not. Their reactions are very odd. So they're kind of like off kilter. And even the responses from everybody after they're hearing gunshots, it's all a little off.
Yeah. And it also connects in, I mean, this is kind of obvious, but like the whole programmed assassin thing, was a big, long time. I mean, I don't remember when the first Manchurian Candidate film comes out, but
50s.
50s, right? And so it's a long time kind of Cold War thing. And yeah, I mean, there's still people who very much believe this, that like, presidential assassins and things like this, right, are somehow psychologically primed to do these things. And I mean, there is a lot of weird stuff when you delve into that world. I mean, it is, as you said, JMP, like the problem with conspiracy theories is that it's designed so that you kind of never can resolve it and chase it, and it's really a kind of unhealthy, I think, obsession to develop. But if you go to like the Kennedy assassination, like there's this guy Louis Jolyon West who is a like confirmed MK Ultra operative who goes in and is by himself with, I think it's Jack Ruby, who had killed Lee Harvey Oswald, and like they had done all these psychological exams of Ruby before that and said like, oh, he's of sound mind, etc. After that, like he has a psychic break after this one meeting with Louis Jolyon West, who's like this very, so there's a lot of stuff, right, about like sort of reasons why people believed or were interested in this line of thought, but that's sort of what they're playing with, right? Is this ideas of using these technologies to be able to program people to just go do murders for, ruling class interests or whatever.
Yeah, because I mean, and that's perfect because after he kills his partners, he has to go kill Bianca Oblivion, right? So he goes to to the Cathode Ray mission, looks for her, and she's like, "You're the assassin." She basically she calls it out, right? And because he can't even, when he speaks for her, he acts like he doesn't even know who she is, like Bianca Oblivion, and she's like, "Okay, oh, so you're the one who's supposed to come and get me, right?" And they kind of like have like a little bit of a maze, and then when he basically gets close to like basically shooting her, she shows him the image of Nikki Brand being killed on the Videodrome set, right? Which I think is interesting to think about if you extend that idea of Max being easily controllable. Because there's one way you could take it at face value that Nikki Brand did actually do this. But then also, like, I don't think you should be trusting the Oblivions either. Right? Like
Yeah.
they're fundamentally untrustworthy like people, right? They're
Yeah,
like
they just reprogram him. They don't like
exactly.
they don't like set him free and like try to
Exactly.
expose the conspiracy. It's more like, now you're our agent.
Now you're our agent, right? Yeah, gonna do it. And she basically buys her time for like the TV basically like shoots and it's a really cool like double switch where essentially he gets shot right from the TV and it basically reorients him, right? And she basically and where you get to like the kind of thing, and she basically says like the big line of the film, which is like "Death to Videodrome, long live the new flesh," right? And the music is like really great. It's like, I mean, it gets like super gothic. You're just like, oh, this is some weirdo shit.
Yeah. And the music is back again. That's like Howard Shore. It's early Howard Shore, but like when I listened to it with that, and there was always this, and I was like, how do you? Because some of that music is so there'd be these moments of electronic and then like classic score. But apparently he sequenced the whole thing on a keyboard to make it sound like, ran it through a keyboard to make it sound like violins and stuff. But it was all through this. Which really fits the theme of that movie. So even though you feel you're getting like this classic score, it's all been sequenced on like keyboards and synthesizers.
Yeah. One thing to say too about the like programmed assassin thing too is I think that maybe one read of this movie also would be to say that you don't actually need to like do um deep mind control, right, in like a CIA sense to program people to do shit like that, right? Like TV is enough. TV itself produces imperialists, right, or people who are willing to sign up to support the imperial project and so on and so forth. And I think that's like, maybe a really interesting element of part of the critique here, right, is to say like, I mean, if we talk about all the movies that we've talked about in the 80s, right? Like it's very clear that there's like this intentional project, especially in the United States in the 80s, to, get people back into like, okay, I want to go fight. I'm ready to fight for this thing. I'm gonna be John Rambo, or I'm gonna, be Arnold Schwarzenegger in, Predator or whatever else, right? And so it's quite clear when you look at this propaganda in the 80s that that is what they're trying to do, right? And obviously if you look at modern day stuff, it's much the same. There's a lot of films that are still trying to do those things. And so anyways, I think that's also part of what's going on, is to maybe move it from that layer of like the programmed assassin to sort of like as being this kind of special thing that I mean, because initially the idea was that like communism could program people to be assassins. Like that's part of what the people like the Dulles brothers and the Rockefellers and their interest in like mind control and psychological warfare was basically like, we're losing to these communist ideologies that convince people to be like so, and not even understanding that a lot of what they're experiencing is like people who are fighting for national liberation, who have like a commitment to their land and sovereignty and so on, right? It's, you know, and so their thinking is like, oh, there's something weird about communists and their ability to control people's minds. Like, we want to figure out how to do that as well. But you know, the more simple way is just to create a bunch of propaganda on TV and in the movies, really.
Yeah, that's why I thought earlier on where I said that we have this notion now. I mean, it's just a word for it now, but we've always had to talk about ideology generating agency. But amongst those of us that are, you know, critical leftists, but the notion of stochastic, like the stochastic agent, which appears, but like but mainly looking at people who like carry out like school shootings and racist attacks, and that you see that they've been like kind of, it's not they've been like programmed directly by some government agency or some like right-wing group that takes them and like converts them. It's like that they've been inundated and part of like these kind of like right-wing reactionary sewer talking points that they become operationalized to violence because they've just been like inundated with it so much, right? And I feel there's, as I said earlier, there's something in this about Max Wren being this kind of stochastic agent, but from the world of video, not the world of social media.
Yeah, and like to add on, like how easily it is to reprogram Max. To me, that actually makes the distance between spectacular optical to the Oblivions not that much different. Like if the leap is that simple, right? Like think about it. If we're thinking like the politics that we all come from, like a person who's severely like indoctrinated to a kind of imperialist kind of mode, right? I'm sorry, the kind of like introduction to a kind of more egalitarian revolutionary politics won't happen like that, right? And I know it's a movie, but that's not, I think the fact that it is a movie is really kind of showing you like these two war, it's like a weird warring faction where it's going to tip in one direction, but honestly, we're going to end up like Max, right? Which when we see at the end of the movie is not a very good place. Like it's not humanity that we end up to, right? And I think back to what Oblivion was talking about, like the external growth. And this is where it gets into a kind of like, I think like Robert Kurzweil, some of these other people about like the next kind of evolution is actually outside of humanity. It'll be some next new thing, right? And it gets real fucking funky, right? In the stuff that we have now, right? Like humanity's actually gone. Like, don't have any faith in this. This thing is over. The next thing is going to come about and it's going to grow out of us, right? But humanity's really a failed project that's not going to exist anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're like the Oblivions are like kind of these precursors to those transhumanist weirdos and the singularity weirdos. It's like there's actually this book. I think I have it here. I can't remember the name of the author, but I do want to shout out to him. But it's by Adam C. Jones, and it is a book about like the data economy, and it's a critique of things like transhumanism and the singularity and all these AI bullshit. And it's interestingly called The New Flesh, right? Which is it's a small book, but it's like, you know, it's a critique of all this stuff and a critique of all these people that believe in all this shit about transhumanism and stuff. But it's interesting that the book is definitely gives it a line where they use that line from Cronenberg to be almost, this is the bullshit that they're spewing, right?
So the next scene, so after like Bianca reprograms, he basically goes to see Harlan, right? So he goes back to Spectacular Article, and it's actually one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I ain't gonna lie, I fucking love this scene, right? And like, you know, Max goes back, right? You know, he's like kind of playing the thing, and he's, you know, he's talking to Harlan, right? And Harlan's like, well, we have like another job for you. And he brings out the tape, right? You know, he brings out the tape and he like tries to shove it into Max's chest. But little does he know that Max's chest has been redesigned and it's like eating his arm, and it comes out and it's a fucking grenade.
I love that scene. It's like one of those old school grenades. I forget what they're called. The ones from the World War II that like you throw
Is
with
it
the handle.
a claymore? Is that what you call that? Yeah, it's like, something like that.
Yeah, it's just like hilarious. Those practical effects, they're so good for.
Yeah, and like he explodes, right? And like the wall blows up. It's so good. I'm like, yeah. Also, because like I'm sorry, I hate Harlan so much in the movie. Like he just as the movie goes, he pisses me off, and I'm like, yeah, get that dude, right?
I mean, it's great that he's set up to be annoying at the beginning, but it turns out he's like a actual shitbag. He's just not an annoying character. It's like, oh, I know there is a reason I hated this guy.
Yeah, thank you. And I get the joy of seeing him just explode. Patron, you know? You know, like get out of here, motherfucker, right? And so immediately, like after that sequence, he goes to find Barry Convex, and this is always also hilarious. He's at one of these like trade shows, right? It's like the most
like there's all those dancers, like the cultural. It's just some like European, like Eastern or Northern Europe. I don't know what it is. They're all in like they're doing some kind of like dance, some like European traditional dance. It's so weird.
Yeah. It also looks like the most like budget ass trade show too. Like and it's like, what is this? Like that's the funniest thing about Spectacular Optical. It's like it's not like they're not painted as like this big, you know, like high level like organization. They look like a mom and pop shop on like a corner. It's like really hilarious.
Yeah, like when he goes into Spectacular Optical to kill Harlan, right? When he comes back, it's like a budget. It's a budget glasses store. Like the ones you see, it's just like the glasses version of Value Buds, which is, you know, one of the Value Buds is in there. It's like, and it's like they got the worker who's like the Caribbean worker that's like the optometrist, and it's just like this is the face of this global conspiracy.
Yeah, it's really funny. And then so then yeah, he, you know, so then you see him in a very, very famous scene, like Convex comes to the stage. He's kind of like talking about like the new stuff, you know, Spectacular, you know, Optical, and then Max and really kind of amazing effect of like the gun has like completely become merged to his hand and in this like really like organic kind of like connection, and he goes in and he goes on stage and like you get like the public assassination of like where he shoots Convex a couple times in the chest and then in his head, right? Which then like makes him like, you know, and then you get the like the another explosion where like his body just like, you know, deteriorates and like explodes again. And then you get the very famous James Woods death to Videodrome, long live the new flesh, you know, and people are screaming and like ah! Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the scene, Convex's death scene is just like gunshots, but then he like it's almost like he's like this deteriorating celluloid at the end, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's weird because it makes you like wonder about. It always made me wonder about Convex. Like, is it what shoots him that makes him do it, or is there something about him because he engaged in this kind of like stuff that made him become this like weird kind of deteriorated, you know, being? So when he would die, he would like explode. You know, it's like it leaves you lots of like questions and makes him even more mysterious. And then you get to the pretty much to the end where Max basically goes to like I guess like a harbor, right? It's like the harbor over there.
Yeah, it's like a Toronto's harbor front. In fact, the area that he went has now been like there's you see if you can see there's like a long spit that goes out behind where he's in that whole area in that period of time was just unclaimed, destroyed industrial land, but they've since revitalized that area into parks and they've turned the spit into a giant kind of park for people to walk on, but while retaining old rebar and things like that. Really, it's called like the Leslie Spit. But yeah, that's where he goes. But it's like back when it's still like this polluted area, which it was really strongly in like that period of time in the 80s.
And he goes into like one of the ships that are there. It's like old, and he goes in, and when he gets there, there is a TV screen, and it's Nikki, right? And you know, she's telling him like, "Look, you've done this thing, but like, it's actually much bigger than you think, right? It's Videodrome is very complex and all that type of stuff, And then she also tells him, and this is where, like I said about the film, where I realized, oh no, this is some dark shit. Like, this isn't like Oblivions. You're like, oh nah, man, this shit is whack, right? You know, she basically says to him, like, well, basically, you gotta die. Like you, there's another war. You pretty much have to like kind of transition to the next phase and go fight that war. And if you think about it from the perspective of like Nikki, this isn't Nikki, right? Like, I think you even have to consider that Nikki Brand is like sitting in her crib somewhere having a martini, right? Like she never even met Max, like, you know what I'm saying? Or she met him just on like the TV show, was like, this dude's weird. I ain't giving him my number, you know what I'm saying? Like, and they never did anything because this is a Nikki that's totally created by like, well, really created by maybe Videodrome and co-created with the Oblivions also, and it's like taking on kind of a life of its own. But then also she is a real Nikki because of what they're kind of saying. Like, she's like a new kind of manifestation that have like you know, come out.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, she gives the line of like, what is it? You have to abandon the old flesh or leave the old flesh, right? And then, of course, you know, he offs himself, right, and says, you know, long live the new flesh, right before that. And I agree with your point, Mtume, about the question you raised it earlier of how early do the hallucinations actually start? Like, at what point, you know, because there's the point at which he becomes conscious of it, right? And we could read that as like the point at which they start. But I think there is another thing to say, that as soon as he's shown the first Videodrome, that everything after that at least could be, and there's not really a way to know cleanly what is and isn't, or if it all is, right? And I think that's obviously, you know, intended to be a certain commentary on television and movies and so on. I mean, even when I think about, I mean, I'm sure you all have experienced that, of your own memory and the way over time memory becomes blended in with like what you remember from movies, what you remember from TV, and your ability to recall things. You there just become these moments where you realize like, oh, that actually didn't happen to me. I either saw it, or I blended something, or I just am misremembering. But in that inability to kind of accurately depict things, you know, one of the things, and other people have talked about this, but television and movies create in many ways the way that we remember the past, or the way we think, especially about eras that we didn't live in as well, where that comes in. And even if we don't want it to be, it's like, well, what we think about of the 50s is like, if we're talking about white people, it's like Leave It to Beaver, right? Like, this is the image that sort of comes into your head or whatever. And yeah, anyway, it's obviously, the whole film is, you know, I think a really interesting critique of just television and the visual media broadly, and what it does to the mind, and then obviously the ways that it controls people, right? And, you know, makes them, shifts their behavior in certain ways.
Yeah, and there's a line that I missed that Bianca Oblivion says to Max. I think he says, "You've become the video world made flesh." And I think you're gonna say that.
No, I was gonna say that was a great line. I just remembered that I had it written down somewhere, but yeah, this like before he's operationalized.
Yeah, and I think that's important
Great line,
for the end because like and it kind of supports what Jay is talking about, because there is this way that like, yeah, it's not an actual reality, but it becomes how people realistically function in the world, right? Like, I don't, this is actually what came to my brain. Do y'all remember the scene in Scrooge where he's with the ghost of Christmas Present, and he goes and he says to him, and he goes, "Yeah, you know, I was running in a field with a girl," and he goes, "Nope." That's Little House on the Prairie. Like, he can't remember his youth. It's all television episodes, and it is, but it does become formative to people's identities. So it actually, in like the kind of metaphorical way, the kind of media influence, like how it actually shapes our flesh, right, and the things that we become as actualized humans.
This is why I said earlier on that I felt like even though like Oblivion is, you know, based on McLuhan, I think there's something more happening in here with like the Deborah notion of this accumulation of images and how lived reality is being replaced by representation, right? And the movie's kind of really getting at that. I mean, especially like at the end when he just has his last long live the new flesh kind of moment, right? It's like it happens twice, but one is within the realm of representation, right? He does the exact thing. Like he sees that, like Nikki's like, I'm going to show you how to do it, right? And it's like it's him standing in front of what exactly is supposed to happen a bit, and then he does it a bit later too. But it's like it's represented, and he's kind of entered that world of representation.
Yeah, then you're kind of left. Then you hear the gunshot and you're just left, right? And like, I mean, I will say, I mean, this is an interesting thing to think about independent or that kind of realm of film of the 80s. I mean, while you had like, you know, the Rambos were kind of all about the bomb drops and the triumph. Um, the 80s, definitely coming out of the 70s, you definitely get this, not necessarily like it's not the same kind of like defeat you would get in like, you know, Five Easy Pieces in like 1970, where, you know, Jack Nicholson just rides off and nothing. This is more like we're in this kind of hellscape, right? And there's going to be like fighters and people, there's going to be these kinds of wars and these kind of struggles, right? And they'll be very violent and they're going to continue. Right now, what they don't see is like a kind of faction revolution that we kind of, you know, would like to be attached to. They're more in like we're now in this like fight of another level, right? Like, and this is what it is, and it's very dark, and there's no way to escape it. Like, it's inevitable, right? And this becomes a really big, I think, foundation for films of this nature of the 80s in this kind of world. And it's like I think what people tended to watch who watched more independent, underground, subversive kind of films, these were the kind of stories, right? Like even if you had like a hero, right, it would be more like an escape, right? You know, like you would escape from the kind of doom and horror, or you'd be like, or a movie like Max, where someone like Max would, you know, he's, I mean, I don't even know what you call him. I think you just call him a protagonist in this kind of way. And he kind of ends in this doomscape, right? But the story will continue after him because he's really just a butt.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that in that context that you're talking about too, you got to also think that in '83, it's kind of like the feeling that even a progressive filmmaker living in North America like Cronenberg, I mean, he's more like left social dem or something like that, but it's like there's this kind of it's kind of the end of the Cold War, right? Like the Soviet Union is already like reaching the Gorbachev whatever bullshit that's going to go on, right? Perestroika is looming in several more years. It's going to be there. The communist and revolutionary movements of North America have collapsed, right? There's just this cynicism, right? So for someone like Cronenberg, it's like at that time the kind of the you know, mass death technologies run by imperialists around the world just seems to be like, it's almost like a belief that it's like they've reached this end of history, but not in like a celebrating it's like just the cynical, it's like we're left with like this no hope, so it's either one shitty like capitalist faction or another. and that's how it ends. It ends on this kind of depressing, no future view that like is definitely kind of a view that you see when you're seeing this collapse of like strong movements that would have existed in the 60s and 70s and things like not necessarily that Cronenberg ever believed in those movements. I don't think he's like not like really like a super like I'm on the streets demonstrating kind of guy, right? But it's definitely that feeling he was tapping into was very clear, I think, in that movie.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I mean, it's interesting to me how unsuccessful this movie was. Like, I found that very interesting. I mean, it like you said, to me, it's the first time that Cronenberg gets some Hollywood backing. The film still has a small budget; it's like 6 million or something like that, right? but it only recoups like 2.5 million of it at the box office. So it's a total flop. And I don't know. I mean, I didn't dig into details. I don't know if you have anything on that, Mtume, but it seems like it like was probably not that widely distributed or shown, which could speak to also maybe concerns people had with the film at like the, you know, corporate level or whatever. But it's interesting because I think while we can critique it and all of this, it is, I genuinely do think one of probably, you know, up there is one of the most interesting films that we've watched so far. And it's not, there's nothing in it that you would be like, I mean, maybe the sex stuff makes it hard to sell in certain formats. And I don't know if that's part of it. Like, but I don't know if you have anything on that, Mtume, but I found that fascinating. Obviously now I'm sure it's recouped everything because it's become like kind of a cult, you know, film and all of this, and has different treatments. There's a Criterion version and all that kind of stuff. But initially it really was unsuccessful, at least in the box office terms.
So it wasn't critically loved. It did critically much poorly than I think they thought it was going to. It was like amongst like the big critics of the time, it was kind of split, and even a few of the big critics who were at the time liked it with conditions. I think they didn't understand the movie, I think, and they kind of like resented that a little bit. I do also think though, it was probably in a weird point because coming out of the 70s, going into the 80s with indie or kind of lower budget films at the time, there was a kind of like weird split where like none of them were really making any money, and they were kind of trying to figure out and kind of how that worked. So I think the a lot of it, I don't want to say it was luck. It was also like the happenstance. I mean, luckily for Cronenberg, The Dead Zone was actually relatively successful. So he was able to kind of like capitalize off of that for his like career, and able to make more stuff. But yeah, I think it was like really misunderstood. People thought it was too weird. Like even promoting like Debbie Harry in it, then you see her, she's doing this weird thing, and everybody's like, "What the hell is going on? This is like very strange." And then I do think the ending, I think in the early 80s, I think for in a time, I don't think people really wanted to engage that way anymore. Like even like trying to
That's
think
a
of
good,
like yeah, go ahead.
if just as a good point quickly, because that, like, you know, there was the whole audience response to the initial
Oh
First Blood,
yeah.
right? And it's a similar kind of, you know, yeah.
And also he said his early screenings of the film went really poorly. He did like early test screenings. The film was a bit shorter, and he hadn't finished some of the graphics and things like that. But as it was they went really poor, and it didn't go well. But I think people like definitely generally had like a weird response to it because it was audiences were being like shifted, and they didn't know what to expect. So those things becoming hits. But a lot of those movies that came out in the 80s of these like body horror, they weren't necessarily hits, especially like the ones that didn't have like the big frontal like marketing villain like Freddy Krueger or something like that, or like Jason Voorhees. Those are not body horror, but I mean like horror, you know, that having that kind of like marketable villain, you can get the teenagers to go watch it. This was probably it probably was too much money for what they wanted to kind of happen at the time. But yeah, since then it's a bit like it's like revered. Like Videodrome is like the movie, you know, and it's reprinted, played all the time. Like it's absolutely, you know, revered.
I mean, a good contrast just quickly is like this versus Poltergeist, right? Which Poltergeist comes out a year later and is like kind of the like more marketable, like not as interesting version of some similar themes, right? And obviously Poltergeist was a hit at the moment, right? But I don't, nobody talks about it now like, oh, this is a great movie that you have to see. Whereas like this is the polar opposite of that, where people will be like, oh, you need to see this, but it was a flop at the time.
I mean, I only really think about I haven't seen Poltergeist since I was a kid. And the only reason I ever think I want to see it again is because the director did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was a much better film in terms of film and importance, right? But I mean, it was still a Spielberg project. I think it was still produced by. It wasn't like fully done by that director. But I think it's like this film, Videodrome 2. I feel like at the time in the 80s, like I think there's like a dumbing down of and we're seeing it again, like, but a really intentionally dumbing down of the watching audience, of the cinema watching audience, right? Maybe it could also be with all the dumb TV shows happening that people are growing up with, but that an audience that just wants to get, and we have the same thing now, that just wants to get served a very simple narrative that like, if you go in and you're used to all the kind of popcorn movies, and you go and you watch Videodrome, or all the action films, R-rated, and you go and watch Videodrome, you're like, what the hell am I watching, right? It requires an attention, a viewing attention that I think was being eroded at that time. It's not like, and I think it's largely, and maybe the film talks about the television technology, because at the time that, like, you got to remember, Cronenberg grew up when television wasn't in every home, right? He grew up, he even talks about this, he grew up with the cinema, right? That's where he go and watch like movies. And he also talks about going to watch all these Italian movies as a kid, right? Because there's an Italian theater near him. So he was like, he would go and watch like films in the cinema, but then eventually the television becomes prevalent in homes. And this film is like him almost addressing the prevalency of televisions at homes and things like that. I mean, as a kind of side point, he's always had this kind of approach to technology that is not traditionalist. Like he's not a techno-determinist. I mean, this film kind of shows that, but he's also not like this fetishist for like the way it used to be with the cinema. I saw this interview with him. He was talking about how he shot his most recent film on digital. And he's like, now digital can do anything film can do. And then he has this thing where apparently Tarantino owns some cinema and wanted to show the shrouds and demanded that like Cronenberg have it printed onto celluloid. And he was like, no way. I'm not doing this. This is stupid. And he made fun of the fetishism that Tarantino had for that. And he's like, and he said, like, look, I grew up with just cinema, and now it's like the TV. And so it's like, I think he's still seeing kind of these technologies in this kind of way. And but again, back to the film, I don't think it did well because the audience was conditioned overall in a certain way, the same way that I feel like a lot of films that I think people would find too difficult because they're like used to the Marvel bullshit and all that other stuff it's in the theaters right now.
Yeah, as for I remember that thing with Tarantino and Cronenberg, and I was really happy that he did that, because that Tarantino is like, him and Nolan's celluloid thing is just absurd and bullshit in so many ways. But yeah, and so I looked it up again. Yeah, Cronenberg said that a big thing with the selling was that I think because they spent money on it and it was universal, they were like, let's just like put it out there. And there was like, no, you probably have to go to genre or art houses or do both. And they actually didn't do either. So they went to kind of a wide release. So kind of to your point, Josh, like, it's like, it just was the Capitol people wanted to basically like, we spent $6 million on this movie. We want 18, 20. We're not gonna get that if we like sit it in, film forum and in all the art house spaces. And so it basically like died in that kind of way. But also, and I think also the critics, messing with it, I think also like didn't help.
Stupid critics.
Yeah, we have plenty of them. These American film critics are kind of dumb. Yeah, one of them, I won't say her name. I did argue with her on Twitter, and it was great when I was still on Twitter. Yeah, she was one of the people who kind of gave it like a mid review, but she's corny.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, like, I think there are things to be critical about the film, but it's not the type of critics that you would get from sort of bourgeois mainstream criticisms of it.
No, not at all.
Anything else either of you want to add? There's some good stuff in the chat I'll run through when we get to it, but I don't know if either of you want to add anything else before we do that. No, go ahead. Okay, chat, yeah. Yeah, so PJ said, now Israeli and U.S. proxy forces release what amounts to snuff all the time. Great point. Epstein class snuff films are real. And I mean, that's something to definitely like the idea of it. It's not happening in Malaysia. It's happening in Pittsburgh. It's like, well, no, it's happening on Epstein's ranch. Like that's where, it's happening on Epstein Island. Yeah. So yeah, so that when I was in high school, real murders and deaths would go viral on like Rotten. And I think a lot of times though, what's interesting is when you dig back through that stuff, it wasn't real. Like it was very often staged, but that was what we were intended to believe for sure. This was a good comment. I don't know. We have to do some Romero actually soon, but shout out to Romero on his low budget films from there. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, Mtume.
I think that's such a really good observation. I wouldn't be surprised if that's like spot on. Honestly, that sounds right. Because Romero is someone they all revere, and there's also a comment on how Romero got his films made. Through not like a negative towards Romero, but like that was definitely done through like interesting financing and people they all had to kind of deal with. It's very interesting histories.
I'll have to check this out. Fred Moten is doing some work on the connection between Eros and white supremacism. Just to give a shout out, the Doctors Against Genocide website, there's a link to donate to the rebuilding of Kamal Adwan Hospital in Gaza, where Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, Abu Safia was practiced medicine under siege. So folks, definitely check that out. Appreciate folks who can support to those kind of initiatives. Yeah, so this was when we're talking about the brain. Yeah, it was that's right, Brittany. It was partly it's gonna fuck up your eyes, your vision. But it was partly that you could get tumors, at least in my household. So yeah, so Stranger Things feels like a descendant of Videodrome. I mean, I think there's elements of that. Partly though, what I would say is like Stranger Things does a decent-ish job, even though a lot of it is digital, of trying to recapture that feel that you got in the 80s of real effects, right? Of these kind of like these fleshy, pulsating, come to life elements. And I haven't watched the whole series. I've watched the first like I think 3 seasons. But I do think that that's part of what they're trying to capture visually. I agree with Mtume on this, I think, and others, is it just looked better. Like when you had makeup and kind of prosthetic and these kind of visual effects that would be based on like making things in the real world, even if they're models or whatever, that it just had a feel to it that was more organic than watching digital stuff. Digital stuff has gotten a lot better now than it was in like the 90s and the early 2000s when you go back and watch some of those movies, and it's really fascinating. And we've talked about this with Samantha Youssef a little bit, of like you went from an era when like real effects and old fashioned drawing animation could do like really visually stunning stuff, like, or the paintings that she talked about, which were the backdrops often in Empire Strikes Back, right? And then you go into an era where like there's this CGI bullshit that's just terrible and so obvious to you. So that's an interesting thing. But I do really like those kind of effects from that era.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things to say. First, about the practical effects, and then about Stranger Things. Is that, yeah, practical effects. It's like this funny talk recently. I'd like hang out, seeing some family members, and they were going on about how much they liked Project Hail Mary, which I haven't seen, but I don't care about seeing because I hate that author. But they were going on about, and then the alien was done with like, it was like a puppet, and I was like, this is just practical effects. Like, why are you so amazed by something that all these films in the 80s did really well? It's like, because it's not CGI anymore, right? It's like, but yeah, like the practical effects stuff. But the thing is, like, I don't see Stranger Things and Videodrome being similar, aside from like, say, practical effects. I feel Stranger Things drew more from like the popular kind of popcorn films of the 80s. And it's like Videodrome is much more like art. Its story is much more like, it has like these empty, cold spaces. It's not like things like Stranger Things will give you like an entire, almost like fictional mythology with all the parts that work well together. It's a well organized like universe where things function and can be fully coherent within it. Where like Videodrome is filled with this notion of, was this real? Is that real? Flesh merging together, much more connected to kind of like the art house horror and things like that. Also, I feel Stranger Things is, maybe this is just because I stopped watching it midway through season 3 because it was so anti-communist. I got pissed off with it. I was like, yeah, I know anti-communist films were in the Cold War, but now you should be reflective on that now, right? Instead of like regurgitating that there's like a Soviet complex underneath a mall and some bullshit like that. And the most worst kind of notions of what Soviets were like. And whereas in like, Videodrome, despite the fact that it's nihilistic at the end, it's not like it's a nihilistic anti-communist film, which means it's not, sorry, nihilistic anti-capitalist film, sorry, meaning that it's not communist, but it's still like critical of like, imperialism and capitalism. Its alternative is that there's no hope, right? But that's a very different ethos than Stranger Things, I feel, which has got that anti-communism that becomes really big in it. Or at least, I mean, maybe it gets better later on, but yeah, I stopped watching it when it got super anti-communist.
Right on. Yeah. No, I agree. So folks asked and talked about this a little bit, but yeah, so Existenz is also a Cronenberg film, and I think, quite referential actually. There's like different things within it that do connect back to this film as well. So yeah.
I'd add on that too, that I saw, my friends and I went to see Existenz when it was released in the theater. And my one friend said at the end, when the credits are rolling, he's like, I got one comment from that. Death to Videodrome, long live the new flesh. Because he saw it just as like kind of reworking the themes of Videodrome.
We have some criticism in the chat I'll share. So I find Cronenberg a deeply conservative director, very white fears of the other. This is also a director who never cast, or I think it means only casts white actors in his films. Black characters don't exist in his world. Also, M. Butterfly was a deeply racist film. And then suggest that we're putting you through this, Mtume. I will say that that's not true.
Absolutely not.
We could be talking about anti-imperial films like Matewan, Brother from Another Planet, or even People Under the Stairs. Interested in all those films. I mean, a lot of the films that we do on the show are intentionally bad, and that's kind of part of the purpose. But I don't put this one in the same category as a lot of what we've done so far.
I mean, I made a couple of comments. I actually don't agree with the whole white people need to direct black people. I direct what you know. If you don't know black people, please don't put them in your fucking movies. I'm big and I've been long away from that thing. I think that actually is I think it traffics in a kind of hope of like understanding. I've never really been into that. Yes, Madame Butterfly is a deeply racist film, but also David Henry Hwang is a really deeply fucked up dude. So deep into who wrote the original one, or M. Butterfly. The anti-imperial films, Matewan, sure. I don't think People Under the Stairs is anti-imperial though. And Brother from Another Planet, we should definitely do it. I like that film. I also have issues with that movie. I can't lie. I'm up and down with that movie. Matewan, we definitely are definitely doing, but like putting me through it. No, I actually think this film is very indicative of a very interesting study of that period. And I think Videodrome has to be wrestled with if you're going to kind of understand the kind of mentalities of politics that were of that period, right? And where people were kind of going and shifting and how they were wrestling with this. So yeah, no one's putting me through anything. Trust me. I'm totally fine. I get put through a lot of shit in life, and this is definitely not one of those moments.
But I mean, it is worth thinking, like, David Cronenberg, his politics are not like, he's not like a communist. He's not like a full-on anti-imperialist, right? He represents a certain kind of niche, a very important, influential body horror market. But I mean, all those criticisms can definitely be made, and he should be criticized for a lot of stuff. I mean, even I've had the notes, even in Videodrome, there is that one black actor that comes in later, and it's like, this guy that's working at, and it's like that's a very stereotypical problematic scene that, like, you know, could be talked about. I mean, you know, Toronto does have the in Toronto the largest Black population in Toronto historically has come from the Caribbean, right, in that area, and there's a long actually history of political struggle and the first kind of Black Power movement in Canada in Toronto. Well, in Toronto came out of that community with Badsy. But I mean, this is all stuff that, like, it just becomes this character in a whole white world in Toronto that, like, appears at Spectacular Optical at the end, right? And even, you know, the Orientalist depiction of the Japanese businessman. Actually, that actor ended up being a conservative politician later on. So like kind of, but that in the way they talk, but you're never sure is the way that they're talking about this film, right? The samurai dreams, when the white person says that Oriental sex isn't natural, is that a critique of Orientalism, or is this David Cronenberg who has, you know, he's not always the most, he's got like all these problems. Like, look, Cronenberg back in like, and this is, I meant to bring this up too, is that Cronenberg in 2009 at TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, and I know this because my wife was working there, and you know, my wife is Palestinian and long been part of the Palestinian. She ended up working there, connected to her job as a gallery director, and then without telling her, after they'd hired her to do this stuff, they brought in the fact that they were going to do a focus on a city, and the city would be Tel Aviv, right? So she was like, she got complaining with people. There's a whole bunch of organizing around it, and organizing and protest around, like, why are you showing Tel Aviv as a spotlight when there's like BDS and things like that? And then all these directors signed this letter of all these protests against TIFF is against free speech, you know, the bullshit stuff. And David Cronenberg, unfortunately, signed that letter as well. He wasn't alone. It was like pretty much the establishment signed it. But so that was like, and people criticized him for that. But to his credit, in 2025, he signed the open letter of people against like the genocide in Gaza. So he's like not perfect, but he's kind of one of those people you see as this progressive thing. I wouldn't say he's deeply conservative, but I think with a lot of these artists, sometimes these conservative strains will appear in their work because they aren't the most critically thoughtful people, and they have had a lot of problems in the way they do things as well. So I mean, there's definitely maybe about criticisms about Cronenberg for sure.
Yeah, and we said that early too. Like, I mean, like I said, I'm not a Cronenberg stan at all. I think he's at best, especially I think his work. I'm not into the history of violence era. I actually find those movies really bad and problematic and all that type of stuff. And I didn't like Crash either for many a reason. But I think it's interesting to point out where American filmmakers also have gone, because if you think about the 70s, which is also overrated in its political acumen in the US and amongst those types of people, right? And why were these directors, when they were kind of situating a kind of like social read, why did they always kind of go to this kind of like weird defeated kind of nihilism look at the world? I do think this is an interesting thing to think about, right? Especially in the 80s and what that reflects within the society. What I like about what Videodrome does is I think it paints it in a way of as like questions and saying, like I said earlier, like if you do take this like Debordian or like Josh put it out, or this McLuhan-esque, or you know, later to be, I don't know, like Baudrillard, I always think these philosophies are dead ends, right? I think they're dead end real reads of the world. And when I look at Videodrome, I see like the actualization dramatized of those. And I will give Cronenberg credit in that I do think he's saying if this actually actualized itself, there would be no hope. So I'm like, I'm not going to like engage in that kind of philosophy. To me, those philosophies are dead ends. That's why I was talking about, like, when I watch the Oblivions, they're not heroes. They're just the people who are going to win this fucking factional war in the moment. And I think that's actually an interesting thing to observe, right? Is it third cinema? No, of course not. It's not about liberatory existence, right? But I do think it's interesting to kind of think about and sit it within the kind of analysis of the times and thinking about it. And I think it really does actualize. I think if you wanted to make an argument against some of those philosophies, I say show the Videodrome. Show them why that shit's a dead end, and you will not have any kind of hope of a new future. Period.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's there's, and we've talked about this, but I think this is probably the best example we've had so far. Alongside, I also think the Carpenter movie that we did with Dylan was another good example, right? Of like, there's really interesting critical work done within this film, and it's interesting to watch how this plays itself out and its conclusion and so on. But it is not, as we've all said, it's not like pointing in some revolutionary direction, right? And this is I think, the limit of a lot of what these mainstream Hollywood projects. I mean, it's not even just that. It's also independent a lot of times, which this is kind of coming out of an independent field into a more mainstream field. That you're just not going to get that, totally. You're not going to get the revolutionary alternative in those spaces. All right. I know there's all kinds of stuff going on in the chat.
It's all good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Josh, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add. This has been great. Really appreciate you joining us for this one today.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to add about the film. I think we've covered it pretty well. Just looking something up because we had, I don't know. Let's see if I'm going to go through my my notes to see if there's anything else, but I actually don't think there is. I think we covered most of it. And yeah, I think that's about all I'll say.
Cool. Anything you want to plug, Josh, before we let you go?
Oh yeah, I think the so actually I should pull up this thing that I have here. So sorry, I'm just trying to find something on my desktop to look at it. So yeah, well, the Material issue 4 is coming out soon. We're just in the layout. It's more like just kind of it's one of those things that we've been waiting forever to get certain art for people, and it's like taken a while to get. I mean, one of the people that's contributing art to it is, she's Palestinian and is traveling around because of the situation. It's been hard to get a hold of her to do stuff, obviously. So we wanted to wait for that. But the new issue also has an interview. I think one of the first interviews in English, I don't know if it will come out first, but it's one of the first ones that was able to done. We were able to do an interview with George Ibrahim Abdallah from, he was a long time political prisoner in France from the 80s, and he just got out in July finally after years and years of demonstration. So he has like this interview too, talking about the current conjuncture. I mean, he was a member of the Lebanese Armed Revolutionary Faction, which was like, in solidarity to PFLP and stuff during the civil war in Lebanon. So yeah, that issue's coming out soon, and hopefully sooner than later.
Oh, right on. So I just wanted to pull this up, and I'll put these in the show description as well. But this is the Material website, and then also there's the Foreign Languages Press website too. And I think this actually, if you click on the web shop here, it would take you right to that. But yeah, definitely recommend it. There's a lot of good stuff that y'all put out, and great conversations. Abdul Jawad Omar, who folks, he's going to be on tomorrow. He's been on many times. Was in recent issue, I think issue 3.
Issue 2.
Oh, issue 2. Yeah. But his interview's up on the website, and so yeah, you can check out on the website like a lot of the back, the pieces from previous discussions. Also, Danny Manabat was in it at one of the issues, and we interviewed him a while back to talk about social investigation and class analysis. Really good discussion. So yeah, good stuff. Appreciate it, JMP, and hope folks check it out. Mtume, you have a New York premiere coming up this weekend.
Yeah, Saturday. Yeah, and then also it should be up. We'll be up on my Patreon Friday, and then next week, me and Stephen Osuna did a really good episode on memories of underdevelopment, talking about Tomas Gutierrez Alea's work, and also connecting it to kind of like how we're thinking about Cuba just in this moment as well. And it's So it's a really good episode, and yeah, be up on my Patreon Friday and up for everybody else to see on like Tuesday.
Right on.
I'm
All
looking
right.
at the congratulations on the film. I do really want to see it when you get is it like it goes into distribution or anything? So
we'll see. Yeah, we'll see whenever that happens. I'm handling just doing as many like screenings as I can, and then from there we'll see what happens after. I don't know though. If you think the world of independent film was written in the 80s, geez Louise. Now who knows what even that is.
Yeah, so this film is called The Hand That Feeds, and it's Mtume's. It's your first feature length film, right? You've done 3 shorts, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I can't count sometimes.
Three shorts that are out. I know you're always working on other stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, definitely. I can't wait to see it and look forward to chopping it up with you and others about it. So, anyways. See y'all later. Have a good one. Thanks again, JMP, for joining us.
Peace.